Previously, as Suho tried to stop the dungeon break with his newfound power, shadow creation, the scene cut to a dark silhouette. It was Cha Hai-in. Beside her loomed an enormous dragon-shaped shadow, blotting out the clouds as it coiled across the sky like smoke. The scene shifts back to Korea, where the dungeon break has thrown the city into chaos. Smoke hangs thick in the air, and destruction stretches across every street. Out of nowhere, a monster lunges forward. But Suho meets it mid-charge, driving a powerful kick into its abdomen and dropping it instantly. Another creature emerges from the haze. Suho moves before it can react, his heel snapping across its face. A third monster tries to flank him, but Suho's strike lands cleanly, his boot crushing into its jaw. Blood spills from the creature's mouth as it collapses, lifeless, onto the shattered pavement. Silence follows. Suho stands still for a moment, surprised by how effortless it felt. Each enemy had fallen with a single blow. The realization unsettles him. He wonders just how much his strength has grown, and whether he has even grasped its limits yet. Before he can think further, movement catches his eye. Down the street, a squad of hunters is pushing the invading monsters back with impressive coordination. Their blades arc through the smoky air, while bursts of magic explode beside them, almost like a choreographed routine. They seem lighter, faster, more confident than before, and Suho recognizes why. The black equipment they're wearing, shadow-crafted gear, is amplifying their abilities. Watching them fight, Suho allows himself a faint smile. They're no longer struggling, they're holding the line like veterans. Without drawing attention, Suho raises his right hand and quietly triggers a command. The shadows respond, rippling outward like a silent wave. His mind shifts inward as the skill activates. Ever since his class advancement, he has been able to reconstruct equipment from the remnants stored inside his shadow soldiers. By pulling those fragments into his mind, he can break them down, reshape them, and reforge them into whatever armor or weapon he envisions, as long as he understands the material well enough. He approaches the corpse of the large monster he defeated earlier. Darkness crawls across its body as the process begins. Suho studies the shifting shapes, evaluating. He knows the result depends entirely on how clearly he can picture the item. The shoulder guard and belt had turned out well because he imagined them precisely. The gauntlet, however, had been forced. Proof that the system can't be tricked. The material must be respected if he wants higher-grade items. A new interface window appears. Now he can finally store shadow-crafted equipment. It's limited to gear only, but even that changes everything. Another detail stands out. Only heroic-grade items can form contracts. His class title, White Shadow, still feels mysterious, though it clearly hints at something beyond ordinary shadow power. His thoughts scatter when the ground trembles. A new wave of monsters rushes toward him, eyes burning with rage. Suho shifts into stance, calm and ready, until a sudden, heavy impact echoes behind him. Someone else arrives. A figure arcs through the air like a streak and slams down onto a massive beast, crushing it beneath his boots. The shock wave ripples outward, rattling debris across the battlefield. Suho turns. The man rises from the crater, composed and confident. It's Park Dojin, as several monsters break from the horde and surround him. Energy gathers in Dojin's hand. Without hesitation, he unleashes his ability. Power surges down his arm, and with one sweeping motion, the creatures disintegrate where they stand. The hunters nearby stare in stunned silence. Even Suho watches quietly, taking in the scale of Dojin's strength. The battlefield is littered with corpses, the metallic tang of blood lingering in the air. When Suho's gaze meets Dojin's, neither man shows hostility, only a calm, unreadable focus. Yet something about Dojin's ease makes Suho uneasy. The perspective shifts to President Wu's office. Live footage of the dungeon break plays across the screen, capturing both Suho and Park Dojin in the middle of the chaos. Yu Jin-ho, standing in front of the television, can't hold back his emotions. Tears run down his cheeks as he stares at the broadcast, overwhelmed simply knowing Suho is alive. Beside him, Wu Jinchul sits quietly, relieved but composed. A phone buzzes. Jinchul answers, and Choi Jung-in's urgent voice comes through first. The masked fighter on screen, he explains, is none other than Sung Suho. Before Jinchul can respond, Lim Taiju joins the conversation while sprinting across rooftops. He confirms he has seen Suho before and is already heading toward the site, intending to place him under arrest. Jinchul urges caution, insisting there's still no conclusive proof Suho has done anything illegal. Taiju pushes back, suspicious of the mask and convinced Suho is tied to the distribution of the dangerous star powder, and possibly even the death of Lee Min-sung. Choi Jang-in cuts in calmly. He doesn't believe Suho is a villain, but he agrees that bringing him into the Hunter Association is necessary. He also reveals Suho's connection as the nephew of Yoo Jin-ho, strengthening the link to the association's leadership. More than anything, he says, he still trusts Jinchul's sense of justice and hopes that judgment will guide what happens next. Jinchul falls silent, thoughts racing as the situation grows more complicated. Back on the battlefield, Park Dojin finishes his call with a steady, controlled voice. The guildmaster had confirmed it. Sung Suho was standing right in front of him. Suho studies Dojin carefully. He knows the name, the newly promoted S rank. Yet something about the way Dojin smiles at him feels unsettling. When the call ends, Dojin turns back with the same unreadable expression and delivers his orders. The Reaper Guild wants Suho escorted to the Hunter Association. Suho immediately understands the implication. This isn't a recruitment invitation, it's an investigation. Dojin explains the situation with cold clarity. Suho is now officially listed as a suspect, tied to the death of Vice Guild Master Lee Min-sung, and possibly connected to the spread of star powder. The accusations land heavily. Suho hadn't expected to hear the word wanted applied to himself. Nearby hunters react instantly. They step forward in protest, insisting there must be a mistake. Suho had just saved their lives. Suho gently stops them with a raised hand. He thanks them, but agrees to cooperate. He had intended to visit the association anyway. Dojin accepts the decision. As Suho prepares to leave, he pauses and retrieves the shadow gear he loaned out. The equipment dissolves into darkness and sinks back into him, stored neatly within his newly awakened shadow inventory. Dojin watches in silence. The more he observes Suho, the clearer it becomes. Something profound has changed. His presence feels sharper, more refined, almost evolved. They walk together through the ruined streets, the storm of battle fading behind them. The tension between them is quiet but heavy. Park remains outwardly calm while his mind works nonstop. Staying close to Suho feels necessary, both to understand him and to anticipate what comes next. Their stride is broken by the sudden chime of phones going off at once. An emergency alert flashes across every screen. There has been a mass breakout at Jisen Correction Facility. Hundreds of awakened inmates, boosted by illegal drugs, are now loose. The word Stardust appears, and Suho freezes. Every memory tied to star powder surges back at once. Dojin notices the change immediately. Suho intends to go. Suho's decision is simple and unwavering. If the escaped inmates are using star powder, ordinary hunters won't be able to contain them. He's seen firsthand what that substance does to people. Dojin argues the logical path. Reinforcements are already being mobilized. Running off now will only deepen the suspicion surrounding Suho, but even as he says it, he knows Suho won't back down. A moment of silence passes. Then Dojin exhales slowly and accepts the inevitable. He'll report that he tried to stop him. Suho promises he will still report to the Hunter Association afterward, then disappears, leaping across rooftops like a moving shadow, racing toward the outbreak. Dojin remains where he stands, watching the faint silhouette vanish into the distance. A subtle smile forms. This, he thinks, is the perfect chance to see how much Sung Suho has truly changed. The story shifts to Jisan Correction Facility. Inmates clash wildly across the grounds. Some fight each other, some lie unconscious, and others simply try to escape in the chaos. A massive portion of the outer barrier has collapsed. Smoke drifts through the shattered yard, and the air is filled with the sounds of impact, shouting, and destruction. From atop a mound of debris, a man stands above the rest, calm, bitter, and commanding. He mocks the system that once held them, reminding everyone that mana stones were implanted into their necks as a way to control, or kill them if necessary. The crowd of awakened prisoners listens, resentment simmering just beneath the surface. He raises his voice. Ever since the cataclysm, they had simply used the powers they were given, and the Hunter Association answered by locking them away and branding them criminals. Now, he declares, it is time to strike back. A roar spreads across the yard. From low-rank fighters to once elite awakeners, anger that had built up for years finally spills out. With a raised fist, he gives the final signal. This prison isn't just breaking. It's becoming a full-scale dungeon-style revolt. The mastermind behind it stands revealed. Hwang Dong-suk. Meanwhile, emergency broadcasts echo through the city. Civilians are ordered to evacuate, leaving streets eerily empty while sirens wail in the distance. But inside one quiet apartment, something far more sinister unfolds. The front door begins to melt, as if eaten away from the inside. A glowing hand punches through, unlocks the latch, and 3 escaped prisoners step into the room. They move as if they already own the place. The first prisoner, calm and focused, inspects the apartment carefully. The others immediately start searching for clothes, tossing aside their uniforms and replacing them with anything they can find. One of them hesitates, worried that going against the association means going up against A rankers and even S ranks. But their leader silences that doubt by revealing a pulsing shard, a star fragment. He claims it was provided directly by Dong-suk's group. Proof, he says, that the association fears what ordinary awakeners might become if they all had access to power like this. With hope and greed outweighing fear, the hesitation fades. Soon the group's mood shifts into reckless celebration. They laugh, even discovering an expensive bottle of whiskey hidden away. But they miss the most important thing in the room, a terrified boy hiding in a low cabinet. Frozen in fear, he clutches his phone, trying to send a message for help. Just before he finishes, a shadow falls across him. The leader crouches down, smiling coldly as he discovers the child. Elsewhere, the city is engulfed in flames. Explosions echo. Hunters and fugitives clash in the streets. And far above it all, Hwang Dong-suk stands atop a high-rise. Admiring the destruction like the conductor of a twisted symphony, he revels in the fact that one signal was all it took to plunge everything into chaos. A man joins him on the rooftop, Kang Tae-sik, calm, direct, and clearly uninterested in Dong-suk's theatrics. He reminds Dong-suk that the riots have already bought enough time. They should move. Dong-suk snaps back, irritated that someone beneath him dares to speak so casually. But Tae-sik doesn't back down. He isn't there out of loyalty, only to retrieve Dong-suk on behalf of his younger brother. Killing him would be easy, but the warning he received before the breakout still rings in his mind. Bring him back alive, no matter what. The moment stretches between them. Pride, anger, and obligation collide. Eventually, Tae-sik swallows his frustration. For now, he'll play guide and keep the situation from spiraling further. Another rooftop had been converted into a temporary landing zone. The helicopter touched down with a shuddering screech, its side door sliding open. Woo Jin-chul stepped out first, adjusting the armor strapped across his chest. Choi Jong-in followed moments later, his expression calm despite the chaos unfolding below. It had been a long time since the two had fought together. The memory of the cataclysm lingered between them, a reminder of just how serious situations like this could become. Jin-chul's tone was tense. Standing back while civilians suffered was not an option. Jong-in asked about the restraints the inmates had been wearing, but the answer was grim. The control devices had been destroyed, and the prison's administration wing, supposedly protected by A-rank hunters, had been wiped out. Whoever orchestrated this didn't stop there. Hunters sent to respond had also been attacked, leaving several in critical condition. The weight of that information settled heavily. If the admin center fell that easily, then someone powerful had been moving behind the scenes, especially now that star fragments were involved. A quiet voice cut through the smoke as another figure joined them. Lim Tae-ju arrived without ceremony, confirming what many had already begun to suspect. This wasn't random violence, it was coordinated. Someone was directing everything from the shadows. Woo Jin-chul acknowledged him, relieved to have another capable hunter present. They would need every ally they had. But Taiju's expression darkened further as he delivered another update. Sung Suho had declined the association's summons and instead was heading straight to Jisan prison. The name alone froze Jinchul in place. Lim Taeju stood before the gathered hunters, stating plainly that Jisan had fallen to escaped inmates, many empowered by star fragments. If Suho, already under investigation for ties to Star Powder, willingly walked into that environment, then his intentions needed to be questioned. He reminded them that none of this began today. Ever since Suho first appeared wearing that black mask, mysteries had followed him. Now, Taiju argued, the pattern was clear. Lee Min-sung's death had not been a tragic accident. It had been a calculated move. Every action since then seemed designed to erase Suho's trail and bury evidence linking him to Star Powder distribution. In Taiju's view, Suho had concealed both his true rank and his real power, the kind of deception that turned a hunter into a threat. He officially labeled Suho a high-risk rogue, a villain who needed to be brought down. It was the reason he had personally volunteered. That was when Woo Jin-chul finally spoke up. There was no proof that Suho had gone to Jisan to cause harm. For all they knew, he might be trying to prevent further disaster. But before that possibility could take hold, Choi Jong-in reminded the room that Suho had willingly hidden something as fundamental as his awakening rank. And trust in a crisis like this was something they could not afford lightly. Jin-chul turned toward him in disbelief, struggling to accept that even Jong-in doubted Suho. Standing apart from the arguments, Park Do-jin watched quietly. His arms stayed folded, his expression unreadable, but his thoughts were racing. Taking on S-rank hunters now would be reckless. Still, Suho must have known refusing the association would lead to trouble. He thought back to the deeper issue poisoning the world, the spread of Star Powder. Declaring it illegal hadn't slowed it. Instead, it had evolved into something stronger, the Star Fragment. And even understanding the risks, hunters continued to chase its power. From his vantage point, Dojin decided to observe a little longer. The battlefield was changing, and sooner or later, Sung Suho would appear. The perspective shifts to Sung Suho, sprinting through a tightly packed forest. Branches snapped around him and leaves scattered as he forced his body forward. His lungs burned, but he refused to slow down. Even with beast possession boosting his strength, the terrain was thicker than expected. Every step demanded more effort than the last. He spared a glance to his side, silently urging Gray to endure a little longer. Breaking through the final line of trees, Suho launched himself into open space. The city stretched ahead, drowned in smoke and chaos. Explosions echoed in the distance. Heat shimmered over rooftops. It looked less like civilization and more like a battlefield torn apart overnight. Landing near the outskirts, he paused just long enough to listen. The sounds sharpened through his enhanced senses. Voices, footsteps, panic, and then the pleading cries of people on the brink of death. He realized what the borrowed beast instinct was doing. It wasn't just sharpening his reflexes. It was forcing him to hear the fear of everyone nearby. The desperation cut straight into him. There was no time to hesitate. He bolted forward again, vaulting across ledges and rooftops, pushing himself faster with every step. Standing still meant more people dying, and he couldn't allow that. Dropping from a roof into a narrow alley, the lingering effects of beast possession faded. His landing was steady, but his breathing turned ragged, sweat sliding down his face. Ahead, the sight he'd feared came into view. Escaped prisoners surrounding terrified civilians. Blood streaked the pavement. Their expressions weren't just cruel, they were ravenous. One prisoner finally noticed Suho and laughed as if the situation were amusing. Others joined in, mocking him, assuming he was nothing more than another hunter in over his head. Suho knelt beside Gray, quietly acknowledging his effort, then rose, expression hardening. The taunts continued, but before the men could react, Suho vanished from their sight and reappeared in motion. His strike connected with the closest inmate. Silence followed. The remaining prisoners froze, unable to process what had just happened. Suho stood over the fallen man, calm and merciless. The ones who escaped had been given a chance. They could have run, disappeared, started over. Instead, they chose to hunt the weak. Mana surged around him, thickening the air. Shadows collected at his feet like something alive, responding to his intent. The atmosphere turned suffocating, forcing the prisoners to take an involuntary step back. He made the situation brutally clear in his mind. There would be no long arguments, no negotiations. The people in front of him had already made their decision, and now he would make his. Anyone who resisted would be crushed. Anyone smart enough to surrender would wake up later. Either way, the fighting would end here. The memory rose without warning. A younger Sung Suho sat beside his grandfather at a quiet fishing pond, his attention drifting from the water to the man's arms. Pale lines and rough scars crossed the old skin. Curious, the boy finally asked how he had gotten them. His grandfather simply reeled in the line first, letting the silverfish break the surface before answering. To him, those marks weren't wounds. They were reminders. Each one came from a moment when he stepped in, because nobody else would. A burning house, a violent confrontation, lives that would have ended if he hadn't moved first. He admitted he had never been fearless. It was just that his body always reacted faster than his fear. The peaceful scene faded. Back in the present, Suho stood over an unconscious criminal, while the others slowly fanned out, clutching pipes and knives. His presence alone pressed against them like invisible weight. He gave them a final ultimatum: surrender and fall unconscious, or push forward and face death. Some hesitated. Others convinced themselves he had to be a high-rank hunter, and then dismissed the fear. That was when one prisoner revealed their advantage, a shard shimmering with corrupt light. The rest followed, swallowing the fragments without hesitation. Power flooded their bodies, veins glowing, muscles swelling, confidence quickly turning into arrogance. They believed they could crush even elite hunters. Suho's expression darkened, and then the voice returned. In the back of his mind, the sneering echo of Lee Min-sung resurfaced, taunting him. The phantom accused him of cowardice, insisting that hesitation only meant more deaths. If Suho truly had power, then he should use it ruthlessly, just as he once had. A cold calm washed over Suho. His heel came down, crushing the skull of the man beneath him. Rage streaked across the remaining prisoners, and they charged. The first lunged low. Suho caught his wrist and snapped it with effortless precision, then used the fallen blade in quick, merciless slashes that the man never saw coming. Another tried to retreat amid thought, shocked that the star fragment still left him slower than his opponent. Suho's punch answered him. Bone shattered, and the man hit the wall hard enough to shake loose dust. Two more attacked together, launching like predators. But the shadows around Suho twisted before they ever reached him. Black spikes erupted upward, impaling them mid-air. They fell instantly, the alley painted in silent, spreading red. When the last body went still, the blood scent lingered, and the phantom of Min-sung materialized once more inside Suho's consciousness. The apparition spoke almost lightly at first, then with harsh judgment. Suho could have subdued them, but instead had chosen lethal force. If he killed humans as easily as beasts, then how different was he from the monsters he fought? The ghost's laughter faded. Suho's face remained unchanged. From the darkness at his side, Baru emerged, concerned. He asked whether everything truly was all right. Suho's answer carried a colder clarity now. He had come to save civilians, yes, but what he witnessed only fueled his frustration. With the apostle of Yttrium looming, humanity should have been united. Instead, infighting and drugs were tearing everything apart. Letting this chaos continue, he thought, would only drag his father down with it. So he made a choice. He would stop hiding. Hunters, descendants of monarchs, even reformed criminals. Anyone capable of resisting the looming threat would be brought together under his leadership. Items, beasts, allies, whatever it took. His eyes glowed with deep violet resolve. Baru recognized the intent and quietly asked if Suho truly meant to make the world kneel. Suho's reply was simpler. He wanted comrades. But first, he would clear the city and gather strength. He needed numbers. He needed order. He lifted his hand, shadows stirring like wind-touched water. Power surged, heavy and commanding, as the words formed silently within him. He called the fallen to rise. The city burned in chaos. Down the ruined road, a sleek luxury car cut through the smoke in silence, its engine smooth, almost calm against the destruction around it. That calm shattered in an instant. A roaring sphere of fire streaked through the air, tearing space around it as it closed in. The blast smashed into the car's side, detonating with a violent flare. Glass and metal exploded outward, scattering across the street while the vehicle twisted under the heat. High above on a nearby rooftop, the same criminals who had raided an apartment earlier watched like predators surveying prey. One of them leaned forward, amused at the sight of the burning wreck, joking cruelly about anyone foolish enough to drive through a war-torn city. But things below didn't play out the way they expected. Through the crackling blaze, a steady male voice rose from inside the wreck. There was no fear, only composed concern as he checked whether Miho was unharmed. A large hand then seized the damaged driver's door and ripped it free as if it weighed nothing. Studying the ruined panel with dry annoyance, he remarked that there was no chance of getting compensation from attackers like these. With effortless strength, he spun and flung the door toward the rooftop. It sliced upward through the night, slamming against the building's edge with a deafening clang before bouncing high into the air. The criminals recoiled. Two figures emerged from the burning vehicle, pushing aside sparks and smoke as if the fire were no more than a nuisance. They walked calmly, side by side, unhurried. The man adjusted his tie with quiet irritation, muttering about the disaster ruining their family outing. Beside him, the woman's expression hardened. Annoyance replaced fear. The woman was Baek Miho, Vice Guildmaster of the White Tiger Guild. The man beside her, composed, authoritative, was Baek Yunho, the guild's leader. He straightened, resolved to end things fast before they became any worse. Moments later, the rooftop ambushers lay sprawled across the ground, unconscious and beaten into silence. In the aftermath, Yunho casually asked Miho how many inmates had escaped. She checked her phone and replied calmly, "Around 500. He sighed, rubbing his neck with mild frustration, half joking that they would likely be scolded for arriving late to their family gathering. Miho's expression tightened. The Hunter Association chairman was already on the way, with 3 S-rank hunters, scheduled to arrive within 10 minutes. There were also rumors that Sung Suho, suspected of distributing the illicit star powder, might be in the area. The name made Yunho pause. It sounded familiar, troublingly so. Then his focus hardened. Whatever else happened, civilians came first. The rescue would begin immediately. Miho smiled faintly, reminded of the days when Yunho would charge into burning buildings without hesitation back when he worked as a firefighter. Before he could reply, his attention snapped elsewhere. Something moved in the distance. Figures lurking in the shadows of a nearby building. A cold unease crept in. He asked if there had been any reports of a dungeon break. Miho answered instantly, "None." That only deepened his confusion. The creature he saw didn't resemble anything human, and didn't belong in this world at all. Elsewhere in the city, panic had already taken root. A woman stood frozen, trembling as a wounded hunter struggled to stay upright in front of her. His face had gone pale, breath shallow, yet he forced himself to shield her until the very end. With what little strength remained, he urged her to flee, then collapsed as 2 escaped inmates closed in. Blood spread beneath his body like a dark pool, stretching across the road. The criminals hovered over him with cruel amusement. One mocked the man for holding out so long just to protect someone else, while the other toyed with his sword, making jokes about romance in the middle of chaos. The woman knelt beside the fallen hunter, tears streaming as she gently shut his eyes. She whispered his name, Hyun, grief tightening in her throat. Her sorrow was abruptly cut short when one of the inmates snapped at her to stop crying and lunged forward, eyes burning red with bloodlust. But death didn't arrive. A single word rolled through the air like thunder, a command that bent shadows to its will. The fallen hunter's darkness stirred, rising from the ground and reshaping into a towering soldier of pitch-black armor. It stepped between the woman and the blade, halting the strike with raw force. Shock rippled through the inmate as his attack failed. The corpse he had mocked now stood again, unyielding. From a distant rooftop, Sung Suho watched with calm certainty. The shadow's reaction proved it. Even in death, the man still wanted to protect her. Suho granted him strength to do exactly that. Power surged into the shadow soldier as Suho equipped him with relics. A Naga warrior belt that sharpened agility and reinforced defense, sturdy shoulder guards that bolstered endurance, and finally a rare Naga blade, a weapon built to tear through enemy protection and amplify each strike. A faint violet glow lit the soldier's eyes as the power took hold. Then it moved. With predatory speed, the shadow warrior charged forward, cutting through the inmates like a storm of blades. Screams vanished almost as quickly as they began, replaced only by the quiet patter of blood hitting the ground. Suho descended from his vantage point. He raised his hand once more, letting darkness spill across the fallen bodies. Their shadows broke free, reshaping into new soldiers who knelt before him in silent obedience. His command was simple: search the city and hunt down every criminal still hiding in the chaos. At his side, Baru buzzed with excitement, delighted to see the army growing with every battle. Suho acknowledged it quietly. Clearing the city would not take long at this pace. Baru admired the sight openly, calling it the true authority of the Shadow Monarch, while Suho allowed a faint smile. He had once doubted this ability. Now, its true value was impossible to ignore. His gaze softened as he watched the woman and the resurrected guardian share one final moment, a farewell granted by borrowed time. When Baru asked if Suho intended to let the shadow remain, Suho agreed. The soldier would fade eventually, but at the very least, it deserved a final goodbye. Baru chuckled, remarking on how different Suho seemed from the ruthless figure who had just overwhelmed the criminals. Suho didn't answer immediately, because something changed. His body stiffened as he felt dozens of connections in his shadow network snap all at once, wiped out in an instant. His voice hardened as he recognized what that meant. A large number of his soldiers had just been destroyed. Baru fell silent, his earlier excitement dissolving into grim focus. If that was true, then the force responsible for this riot had finally revealed itself, and the real mastermind was now somewhere ahead. Across the battlefield, bunch of fallen shadows littered the ground. Kang Taesik moved among them like a phantom, his dagger flashing as he sliced through each one with ruthless precision. His expression was cold, his focus unwavering. Behind him, Hwang Dong-suk surveyed the scene with growing suspicion. The creatures didn't resemble any monsters he had seen before, and the way they dissolved into darkness unsettled him. Irritation quickly replaced curiosity as he barked at Taesik to hurry and clean everything up. Taisik's reply was sharp. If they had left when he suggested, none of this chaos would have reached them. He spoke with arrogance, confident that the star fragment he consumed had pushed him beyond the strength of an ordinary A-rank hunter. But then everything changed. The remaining shadows stopped moving. Instead of attacking, they silently lowered themselves, kneeling like knights bowing to their sovereign. Taesik froze, momentarily speechless. A familiar presence stepped from the darkness. Baru's wings twitched with excitement as Sung Suho emerged, his gaze fixed ahead with chilling clarity. The criminals instantly realized he was the summoner guiding these black soldiers. Dong-suk scoffed at first, mocking Suho, but his confidence wavered when Suho questioned him about the mysterious apostles connected to Lee Min-sung. While pretending to chat casually, Dong-suk signaled Taesik to strike. In their minds, summoners were vulnerable once separated from their shadows. Taesik blurred forward, lethal and silent, but Suho was already gone. By the time Taesik registered what happened, Suho stood directly in front of Dong-suk, his hand resting heavily on the man's shoulder. His violet eyes hardened as he demanded to know where the star fragments came from and why the city had been thrown into chaos. Under that crushing pressure, Dong-suk's bravado shattered. Suho's grip forced him to his knees, pain tearing through his body as the ground cracked beneath him. Only then did he confess. The fragments came from his brother, and the destruction was nothing more than entertainment to him. Rage flickered across Suho's expression. So many lives ruined simply because someone felt like watching them suffer. Desperate, Dong-suk called out to Taesik for help, but Taesik hesitated. The more he observed, the clearer it became. Suho wasn't someone to provoke. Survival meant running, even if it meant abandoning the man he worked for. Before he could move, something invaded his mind. A voice, overwhelming, cold, and ancient, commanded him from afar. Gold light crawled across his body, overriding his will entirely. The apostle of Iterum had seized control. Taesik vanished into stealth and charge. Suho sensed the killing intent at the last second and stepped aside. The redirected strike tore through Dong-suk instead. Invisible blades shredded him where he stood. His body collapsed, lifeless, as blood seeped dramatically across the broken pavement. Suho didn't react emotionally. Instead, he studied the distortion in the air with sharp focus. Baru recognized the power instantly. The apostle had not only intervened, he was testing Suho deliberately. Suho's expression darkened. Someone infused with star fragments was now being puppeted like a weapon. And whoever controlled that power was still watching, somewhere far above the city. Standing over Dong-suk's corpse, Suho silently took in the scene. His shadows knelt beside him, awaiting orders, while the presence of Taisik vanished completely into the night. Kang Taisik melted into the darkness, hidden completely by his camouflage. Somewhere beyond sight, a cruel smile tugged at his lips. Grass bent and dirt shifted as Taisik moved at impossible speed, too fast for the eye to follow. Rather than strike Suho directly, he targeted the shadows instead. His daggers flashed through the air, unseen, merciless, carving down Suho's soldiers before they could respond. Each shadow collapsed and dissolved, returning to darkness. Only when they were gone did Taisik shift his attention back to Suho, unleashing a barrage of invisible slashes. The air itself seemed to split. Suho didn't panic. He stood firm, listening, letting instinct guide him. His senses focused on the faintest clues, the whisper of footsteps, the slight distortion in the breeze, the echo of breath hidden in the night. So this is camouflage, the trademark of assassin-class hunters, he thought. He could track Taisik just enough to avoid the strikes. But landing a counterattack was another matter entirely. High above the city, inside a quiet aircraft, the Apostle of Iterum opened one golden eye. His gaze stretched beyond the clouds, observing the fight below with chilling composure. Taisik, boosted by the star fragment, now fought at the very peak of A-rank power. In the Apostle's judgment, Suho shouldn't have stood a chance. Then a voice reached him. Suho spoke to him calmly, deliberately. He explained that until now he had remained hidden out of caution. But something didn't add up. If the invader from beyond was truly as powerful as rumored, why manipulate others instead of acting alone? Suho's conclusion was simple and terrifyingly accurate. The apostle was preparing, learning, evolving, just like Suho. The apostle's expression darkened. On the ground, shadows surged around Suho as he raised his hand. His voice carried across the battlefield. No fear, only resolve. He called the hidden enemy out, challenging the one watching from afar. The moment he moved, Taisik faltered. Suho's shadows lunged toward the empty air. Panic flickered across Taisik's eyes as he realized the truth. His camouflage shattered. He barely had time to gasp before the final strike drove through him. The apostle staggered inside the aircraft, clutching his eye as Lim Taiju called out in concern, while the apostle dismissed it calmly. But behind the mask, a twisted smile surfaced. Sung Suho was becoming fascinating. Back on the battlefield, Suho stood between the bodies of Hwang Dong-suk and Kang Taisik. He summoned them. Darkness rose beneath the corpses, drawing them into the abyss. Their twisted forms emerged moments later. Not living, not dead, forever bound to Suho's will. He regarded them with cool detachment, reminding them of the destruction their arrogance had caused. Then condemned them to serve as punishment. As shadow creation surged, the night rippled with power. Something else formed among the darkness. The shadows condensed, hardening into solid objects. First came armor, swindler's armor, rare grade built for endurance and protection. Then a faintly glowing ring, killer's ring, heroic grade, carrying the ability to cloak its wearer entirely. System messages continued cascading before Suho's eyes. Shadow item creation had advanced. Heroic grade crafting unlocked. Unique names could now be bestowed, allowing the items themselves to grow. He chose the ring. Light flared as he imbued the new name. The system confirmed it. A leveling item, bound solely to its first bearer, capable of sharing its soldier form stats with its master. The ring pulsed on Suho's hand, alive with power. A faint smile crossed his lips. If he could continue pushing past heroic grade, he would climb faster than ever. Faster than anyone expected. and step by step, he would close the distance to the man standing at the very top, his father. A violent storm of power tore through another corner of the city. One of Suho's shadow soldiers lunged forward and was instantly ripped apart by a massive, clawed hand. Baek Yunho stood amid the destruction. One after another, Suho's soldiers vanished beneath his relentless strikes. Back on Suho's side, his expression tightened. He felt the links to his shadows snapping one by one. Beru's voice rang in his mind, urgent and sharp. The ant general sensed danger. Something powerful was heading straight for them. Suho steadied himself, jaw clenched. Whatever it was close. A thunderous blast suddenly erupted through the ruins. A building wall collapsed outward. Dust flooded the air. Stones rained down. Suho lifted his arm to shield his face, while debris bounced off Beru's armored head with a hollow crack. From the thick haze, a towering silhouette emerged. Each step heavy, controlled, and imposterizing. Baek Yunho appeared, dragging the crushed remains of a fallen shadow as if it weighed nothing. His transformed body rippled with muscle and striped fur. His voice carried across the ruined street. He spoke of rushing here after seeing the black pillar. Then his gaze locked on Suho, suspicion hardening his expression. Suho muttered under his breath, confused as well. Why would something like this be here? But Baek corrected him coldly. He wasn't a monster. He was Baek Yunho, guildmaster of the White Tiger Guild. Recognition flickered in Suho's eyes. White Tiger's strongest hunter, the S rank known for transformation. Baek stepped forward, claws gleaming. His senses told him one thing. Suho reeked of blood. He demanded to know who, or what, he truly was. Suho didn't flinch. He answered calmly. He was a hunter, one here to save lives. When Baek demanded his name, Suho spoke without hesitation. Sung Suho, and he knew the association was after him. He also knew he was innocent. Baek's laughter rumbled out, so the wanted hunter was bold enough to admit it openly. He spoke of star powder, and the guild member nearly destroyed because of it. In an instant, Baek's claws hovered at Suho's throat. If Suho was truly innocent, how would he prove it? Suho brushed the claws aside, his tone unwavering. There wasn't time for interrogation. People were dying, and having an S rank here was something he couldn't afford to waste. Baek blinked, momentarily thrown off by the response. Suho continued, firm, steady. Saving people came first. Hesitation meant death. Those words struck something deep inside Baek. A memory surfaced. The past, when he wore a firefighter's uniform. Beside him stood Sung Il-hwan, Suho's grandfather. Il-hwan's voice echoed in his mind. Make the necessary choice first, then find a way to make it the right one. That is the duty of those who rescue others. The recognition struck Baek Yunho like a bolt. His expression softened, and his voice shook with surprise. That name, now it made sense. Without thinking, he grabbed Suho's shoulders, a rare excitement lighting his face. This was the grandson that Sung Il-hwan had always spoken so proudly about. The feral aura faded from Baek's body as he returned to human form, a sincere smile replacing his earlier suspicion. He finally understood. So Suho was Il-hwan's grandson. Elsewhere, smoke curled up from shattered buildings while alarms echoed through the city. On a bridge, two soldiers guarded the checkpoint, rifles trembling in their hands. One glanced toward the distant flames. He wondered aloud whether they could really stop rampaging monsters when even bullets barely scratched them. Their squad leader stared forward in silence, then sighed heavily. Orders were orders. Whether possible or not, they had to act. The younger soldier swallowed nervously. Something about the city felt wrong, like the atmosphere itself had turned hostile. The leader agreed quietly. The scene shifted back to Baek Yunho. Now fully transformed again, he tore through the streets like a living storm, claws flashing, muscles surging. Escaped inmates fell in his wake, each strike shaking the ground. At his side, Sung Suho advanced with calm precision. Every move was measured, efficient, lethal. Their combined presence flooded the city with crushing pressure. They weren't simply fighting. They were purging the disaster spreading through the streets. Baek glanced sideways and smirked. For a summoner, Suho carried strength beyond expectation. strength worthy of Il Huan's name. Suho remembered then. Beck had once worked under his grandfather in their firefighting days. The thought made him smile faintly. Beck, meanwhile, laughed heartily and told Suho to just call him uncle. They pressed forward, clearing neighborhoods one after another. Still, Suho voiced concern. With this much noise, wouldn't the criminals simply hide? Beck's aura surged, rattling windows. His answer was firm. Hunters didn't exist simply to chase villains. They existed to save civilians. Fear would pin the criminals down, and that hesitation would keep people alive. Suho finally nodded. This, he realized, was what leadership truly looked like. The burden of protecting an entire city. Then Beck casually ruined the seriousness of the moment. He asked if Suho had a girlfriend. Suho blinked, embarrassed, and shook his head. Beck grinned mischievously. Good, his daughter was single. Suho could only stare in speechless shock. A helicopter cut across the sky overhead. Inside, S-rank hunters surveyed the burning city below. The association's chairman watched carefully, phone pressed to his ear. On the ground, Beck Miho signaled from a rooftop, gathering civilians to safety. The chairman praised her. Hunters and citizens alike had been successfully evacuated. But then his eyes narrowed. Dark figures moved alongside the criminals below. Were those monsters? Miho hesitated, unable to fully identify them. Before the chairman could decide, Lim Tae-gyu rose from his seat. If those shapes were enemies, he would simply eliminate them. The chairman tried to stop him, but Lim had already stepped into the rushing wind. He plunged from the helicopter, eyes closed, letting the roar fade into eerie quiet. When they finally opened, they gleamed with deadly focus. A skill activated. Across the city, faint red markers appeared, painted over rooftops, alleys, and rubble. Every shadow soldier within range was locked into his sights. He drew his bow. The string trembled under immense force, then snapped forward. A rain of arrows divided mid-flight, curving unnaturally, each one hunting its chosen target. From below, it looked like a coordinated missile strike. Shadow soldiers were pinned instantly. One by one, they burst apart, their forms dissolving into light. Suho stopped and stared upward, recognizing the attack. Baek Yoonho smirked. Reinforcements had arrived. With association hunters involved, the villains wouldn't be rampaging much longer. Relief washed through Suho, but it lasted only a breath. Something felt wrong. Lim Taegyu's gaze shifted and locked onto Suho. The calm precision in his eyes warped into something darker. Grief and fury twisted together, turning his focus into a weapon. At last he had found the one he blamed, and memories flooded Lim's thoughts. The funeral, the guilt he could never bury. In his mind there was only one truth. If star powder had never spread, Lee Min-song would still be alive. The bowstring trembled. Lim released. The arrow ripped through the air faster than sound. Suho's instinct screamed. He barely had time to raise his guard. The question flashing through his thoughts. Why is he aiming at me? Baek Yoonho caught the arrow with his bare hand, snapping it apart as if it were nothing. His expression hardened as he lifted his gaze toward the sky. Lim dropped from above, landing with a shockwave that cracked the rooftop beneath him, aura raging like a storm as he faced them. He demanded answers. Why was Beck standing beside a criminal? Beck stayed calm. He tried to slow the situation, insisting there had been a misunderstanding. But Lim wouldn't listen. To him, Suho had fled summons and ignored orders. That alone made him guilty. A villain, he declared. Beck's expression turned cold. Suho had been saving civilians non-stop. How could that be villainy? He spoke firmly, but the argument only fueled Lim's anger. Another arrow sliced the air, skimming Beck's cheek. Lim's rage deepened. If Beck insisted on defending Suho, then he demanded to know exactly what connection they shared. The pressure in the air thickened. Realizing words wouldn't be enough, Beck exhaled slowly and transformed fully, and his aura exploded outward. The street trembled beneath the power of his beast form. If Lim refused to calm down, Beck would stop him by force. The atmosphere turned suffocating. Two S-rank hunters squared off, energy clashing unseen but violent enough to rattle the ruins around them. Suho stood frozen between them, overwhelmed. If either of them lost control, entire districts would be wiped out. And then, Flames burst to life. A towering ring of fire rose around them, sealing the battlefield. Figures stepped through the blaze. Choi Jong-in, Chairman Woo Jin-chul, Baek Mi-ho. Even the silent apostle lingered in the shadows. Choi's voice cut across the chaos, sharp and commanding. Everyone was to stand down. Baek's shoulders eased. At last there was a chance to explain. He spoke honestly. Suho was the grandson of Sung Il-hwan, the man who had once saved his life. Baek would stake his reputation on Suho's innocence. Silence followed. Mi-ho's response was icy. Family connection alone wasn't proof. Choi agreed. A fugitive was still a fugitive. Lim Taegyu's fury only burned hotter. He accused Baek openly, warning him not to throw away his honor for sentiment. His killing intent surged again. Baek didn't budge. He still urged discussion. And finally, Woo Jin-chul stepped forward. His authority washed over the group like a weight. He declared that they would talk first. The others protested, stunned, but the chairman didn't waver. His attention settled directly on Suho. Calm, absolute, demanding truth. Could Suho prove his innocence? The question hung in the scorching air, every gaze fixed on him as the fire crackled around the circle. Woo Jin-chul fell silent, lost in thought. A distant memory had surfaced, one he had not expected to return. In that moment, Jin-chul found himself wondering why the memories of his past life had come back at all. A chilling possibility crept in. Perhaps Sung Jinwoo had foreseen this long ago, and had prepared them for the day he would no longer be here. The memory faded, and reality crashed back in. The world was inching toward disaster. The great cataclysm, the war that would soon engulf humanity. And somewhere at the center of it all stood Suho, a young hunter who would eventually have to fight alone. Jin-chul steadied himself and faced him directly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. He demanded that Suho prove his innocence. Suho hesitated, then answered with conviction that he could. But before he could explain, Choi Jong-in stepped in, his tone sharp and unforgiving. This wasn't the time or place, he argued. Suho had fled the association's summons. He had been at every site tied to the mysterious star powder. He had joined raids while hiding the truth. And worst of all, he had been present when Lee Min-seong died. Lim Taegyu's anger erupted the moment the name was spoken. To him, the verdict was already sealed. Suho needed to be arrested immediately. Even Woo Jin-chul felt the pressure. By every rule and every report, arresting Suho was the correct choice. And yet he couldn't let go of one thought. If Suho had done all this, surely there was a reason. Even if it cost him his reputation, Woo Jin-chul decided he would stand beside him. He declared that Suho had reached the disaster site before anyone else and had risked his life to save civilians. Calling him a criminal now would be unjust. Choi Jong-in studied the chairman in disbelief. Lim Taegyu's rage was already at its peak, and yet Woo Jin-chul insisted on protecting Suho. Before the argument could escalate further, Suho finally spoke. There was no need for everyone to fight, he said. His aura erupted like a storm, shadows curling around him. He would prove his innocence himself, even if the method was ruthless. Jin-chul tried to stop him, but Lim Taegyu was already moving. His bow snapped, and an arrow drilled straight into Suho's shoulder. Blood flowed, yet Suho didn't move an inch. He simply stood there, and the shadow beneath Taegyu suddenly crawled upward. In an instant, Suho's shadow skill pierced into him. Taegyu collapsed as a surge of long-buried memories ripped through his mind. Battles, comrades, the life he had once lived and forgotten. Choi Jong-in and Baek Mi-ho rushed forward, stunned. Suho staggered, gripping his wound, but there was no time to rest. If the hunters who once fought alongside his father remembered their past lives, then they would understand. And the one who needed to awaken most was Choi Jong-in. Suho leapt forward, shadows bursting around him. Choi reacted instantly, conjuring a storm of blazing fire. The vortex split the street in two, but Suho punched straight through it, his shadows wrapping around him like armor. Just as he closed the distance, two attacks struck him at once. Mi-ho's kick and Park Do-jin's blow. Suho crashed into the ground, blood scattering across the stone. Yet even through the pain, he smiled faintly. He had done it. A faint shadow key pulsed at Choi Jong-in's chest, and the torrent of memories slammed into him too. He dropped to one knee, overwhelmed. Lim Tae-gyu trembled, tears in his eyes, trying to understand what he had just remembered. Choi could barely speak, shaken to his core. They turned towards Suho, bleeding, exhausted, but still standing. He told them calmly that what they had seen came from before the reset, from a world that had already been rewound once, so peace could exist at all. The moment the dots connected, Choi Jong-in understood. This was tied to Sung Jinwoo. Suho nodded. His father had carried the fate of the world entirely on his own. And even now, somewhere beyond Earth, he was still fighting a war no one else could see. That was why Suho fought the Iterum invaders in silence, to bear even a fraction of that burden. Lim Tai-jae's jaw tightened, brows furrowed. Something about Suho's words felt strange, almost absurd, but still, there was a tug of truth he couldn't ignore. Choi Jong-in's expression darkened as he turned inward, considering the memories that had returned. If they were real, then maybe Suho's claims weren't far-fetched at all. Woo Jin-chul stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension with absolute authority. Every word Sung Suho spoke was true. He too had regained memories of his past life, and it was because of those memories that he had been able to prepare for the coming catastrophe. His gaze settled on Suho. We should hear him out first. The room grew heavy as Suho began to speak. He shared everything he knew, the existence of the outer gods, the Iterum lurking beyond, the apostle walking among them, and the star powder sown to destabilize the world. Choi and Lim listened in disbelief, their eyes widening. Choi broke first. Most of the incidents we've faced, they were connected to the Iterum. Lim's fist clenched as the realization hit. Then Lee Min-sung's death. It was all because of this. Woo Jin-chul turned to Suho, his voice grave. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Suho uncorked a small recovery potion, the liquid faintly glowing as he drank. If the apostle had discovered me before I was ready, he explained, I would have become my father's weakness. I had to grow strong first. Lim and Choi exchanged a glance, a dawning understanding crossing their faces. Lim spoke carefully. Then you must also be a hunter who can grow stronger, like Sung Jinwoo. Suho nodded briefly. Choi suddenly grabbed Suho's hand, curiosity flashing in his eyes. Did you know that Hunter Cha Hyen once belonged to the Hunters Guild? Suho's eyes widened. You mean, my mother, she was a hunter too. His face lit up with admiration. At the edge of the gathering, the apostle's golden eyes narrowed. The hunters were beginning to understand Suho's mission, and worse, they were starting to rally together. He frowned. Bold move, Sung Suho. Meanwhile, Baek Yun-ho and Mi-ho watched from the side. Baek muttered to himself, scratching his head. So the misunderstanding is cleared, but honestly, I still don't fully get what's happening here. Suho turned calmly to him. It's understandable. Without context, it would be confusing. That's why I'll verify the memories of the past world. The apostle's expression darkened instantly. If Suho continued, he could be exposed. But Suho, standing resolute in the center, allowed a faint smile. It's time we all recover the memories of the previous world, he said, lifting the shadow dungeon key. Its surface shimmered with a faint black glow. Baek raised an eyebrow, chuckling low. Memories of the previous world, huh? Now that's interesting. Mi-ho, still wary, stepped between her father and Suho. Father, don't you think this could be dangerous? Baek ignored her, placing a hand over Suho's as the key activated. Shadows erupted outward, wrapping around both of them. The air grew heavy, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Every hunter froze, eyes locked on the scene. Father! Mi-ho shouted, panic in her voice. The apostle watched silently, golden eyes narrowing. When the ritual ended, Suho lowered the key. Baek's body trembled as the flood of memories returned. Tears streamed down his face, but a bittersweet smile lingered on his lips. Lim Tae-gyu and Choi Jong-in observed silently, feeling the truth in the display. Mi-ho's shock mirrored her father's intensity, though she gradually stepped forward, resolute. Then please, do it for me too, she whispered. The apostle's gaze sharpened. If the world had truly been reset, the key would not respond to him. Any attempt would reveal his nature. Suho lifted the key once more. Seconds passed. She rubbed her forehead, confused. Are you sure this works? I don't feel anything. Baru emerged from the shadows, his mandibles clicking as he spoke. Young monarch, some may not recall their past at all, just like this one. Miho glanced at him dismissively. What is this weak-looking insect? Baru's compound eyes flared. Weak. You dare call me that, I'll tear you apart where you stand. Suho raised a hand calmly. Finish your explanation, Baru. The ant general relaxed slightly, still bristling. He explained that the previous world had existed 20 years ago, when mana was still prevalent. Differences in the present were natural. Miho's eyes widened. I wasn't born then. Suho's gaze fell on the shadow key. He had used it on Park Do-jin, the apostle in disguise, and nothing had happened. The apostle smirked. It seems I cannot recall memories either. Miho's voice cracked. Does that mean I truly didn't exist in the previous world? Beck tried to calm her, but father-daughter bickering erupted naturally. Woo Jin-chul approached Suho. Don't you think this is remarkable, he said. This is the peace hunter Sung Jinwoo chose. Lives that were erased before now exist. Isn't that something to be grateful for? Suho turned to the assembled hunters. He understood. This was his father's wish, a world where lost lives could exist again. Suho's voice rose, steady and resolute. Everyone, if we allow the outer gods to invade, this world will surely be destroyed. I ask for your strength. Stand with me. Days later, the nation finally heard the official report. The prison break that had thrown the country into chaos was largely contained. Less than 1% of escapees remained unaccounted for. News anchors detailed the swift actions of the Hunter Association, emphasizing the heroics of one particular hunter. Eyewitnesses confirmed that a black, human-shaped figure had drastically reduced casualties. Cameras captured the moment, and reports clarified that the figure was not a monster, but a hunter skill wielded by E-rank hunter Sung Suho, who had arrived first to assist civilians. Far away, a man named Hwang Dong-soo watched the broadcast with growing fury. His jaw clenched as the word hero echoed through the television speakers. Bloodlust burned in his eyes. Sung Suho. I'm coming for you, he muttered through gritted teeth. At the Hunter Association, Suho stared at the television in disbelief. What kind of nonsense is this? He asked, tense. Woo Jin-chul responded calmly, his tone authoritative. We coordinated this ahead of time. Reawakenings are rare, but not impossible. The public will accept it. Choi Jung-in, weary and frustrated, adjusted his glasses. I no longer wish to hide, he said softly. He turned to Suho with a serious expression. Surely you don't intend to publicly declare yourself as a growth hunter. An existence that defies natural law will invite chaos. People will judge you by their fears. Irregulars are always resented. Suho's jaw tightened, his expression tense. Yet he listened carefully. Choi continued, his voice sharp and precise. You said you had 3 goals. First, your own growth, to be strong enough to fight alongside your father. Second, to unite hunters capable of resisting the outer gods in the war to come. And third, his voice dropped, to defeat the apostle of the Iterum who walks among us. Suho clenched his fist, determination blazing in his eyes. Once these objectives are achieved, I will go to aid my father, who even now fights the forces of outer space alone. Choi set down his tea carefully, his gaze focused. If you intend to rally the world's power against the Iterum, passion alone will not suffice. You must consider your image, how to influence hearts, and steer people in your direction. Every decision matters. Suho paused, the weight of the advice sinking in. Then he raised his head, resolve returning. For you to give me such guidance? Does that mean you intend to help me? Before Choi could answer, Baek Yun-ho slammed his hand on the table, the sound like thunder. Of course, he said firmly. You are the grandson of Captain Sung Il-won and the son of Sung Jinwoo, the hope of humanity. But more than titles, your actions move me. From today, the White Tiger Guild stands with you. Choi adjusted his glasses, his expression cooling. Even Jinwoo struggled against the Atarim. I cannot know how much I can help, but I refuse to watch Earth be destroyed. You have the Hunters Guild support as well, Wu Jinchul observed silently, clenching his fists. With Beck and Choi persuaded, only Lim Taeju of the Reaper Guild remained. Lim sat with arms crossed, his face unreadable. Tell me plainly, he said coldly. Was it truly you who killed Lee Min-sung? Beck's temper flared. Why bring that up again, he snapped. Suho raised his hand, steadying the tension. I killed him, he admitted firmly. Lim's gaze sharpened. Then tell me, what exactly happened to Lee Min-sung at that time? Suho's tone remained low but unwavering. He was possessed by the apostle of the Atarim. Lim pressed further, suspicion in his voice. And why did you approach him? I confirmed he was cooperating with the Atarim, Suho explained. I sought information from him. And why was he cooperating, Lim asked. Suho shook his head slightly. That I do not know. Lim lowered his eyes, thoughts heavy. I already know you bear no fault, Suho. Then why am I even asking these questions? Suho's voice broke the silence. Could it be, Hunter Lim, that what you truly want is to know his final moments? Lim froze, caught off guard. Suho continued quietly. At the very end, Lee Min-sung was smiling. Lim's expression twisted in disbelief, smiling. Yes, Suho replied, gaze steady. I still don't know what that smile meant, whether exhilaration or the release of letting go. To me, it felt bitter. But one thing was clear. He never lost himself, not even until the very end. He left a deep impression on me. Lim exhaled, a long, heavy sigh escaping. Lee Min-sung, ever the same selfish egotist. The Grim Reaper Guild will also cooperate with you, Suho. Wu Jinchul allowed a faint smile. Suho had secured the cooperation of the three major guilds, not through lineage alone, but through his sincerity and actions. Suho's chest tightened as he straightened. Memories of the past battles, of hunters united under Sung Jinwoo, stirred within him. He cleared his throat, turning to address the room with determination. Allow me to explain the plan moving forward, the very first step. But before he could finish, Wu Jinchul's face went pale. Shock flashed across his eyes. Baek Yun-ho's jaw dropped, Lim Tae-ju stiffened, and even Choi Jung-in faltered. In his mind, Wu Jinchul thought with pounding heart, Hunter Sung Jinwoo's son. Perhaps Suho truly will bring a storm of blood within the Hunter Association itself. In the depths of the Shadow Dungeon, Suho's body trembled under the relentless strain of his training. Sweat drenched him as he pushed against the immense weight bearing down on his shoulders. Amit loomed behind him, his presence like a mountain made flesh, immovable and crushing. As Suho counted aloud, 100. His legs quaked violently, finally surrendering to the exhaustion. He roared, the sound a mixture of strain and sheer willpower, before collapsing heavily onto the cold dungeon floor. A system notification blinked before his eyes. Daily quest completed, immediately followed by another. Reward granted. Completely spent, Suho lay gasping, sweat pooling beneath him. Essel and Gray rushed to his side, concern etched across their faces. Amit, tall and imposing, remained silent, his voice betraying only a hint of pride. At first you struggled to handle even the basics, Amit said, his tone softening slightly. Now, you can complete the exercises on your own. Suho forced himself upright, opening his system shop with trembling hands. Honestly, he admitted, breath ragged, my body feels heavy and restless if I skip this training. He downed a healing potion in one gulp, the cool liquid easing the burn in his muscles, and gave Amit a tired but genuine smile. Good work, Amit. Essel watched silently, her crimson eyes narrowing. The young monarch has changed so much, she thought, not just in body or mana, but in the way he carried himself, echoing the path his father once walked. Fully recovered, Suho rolled his shoulders, tension melting away. A grin tugged at his lips as he stood. I've got things to do outside. See you all. Essel and Gray blinked in surprise. Leaving already, Essel asked, disappointment in her tone. Suho's smile remained steady. From now on, I'll be busier than ever. I plan to clear a field-type dungeon today. He recalled the meeting with S-rank hunters and the chairman. I spoke with the higher-ups at the Hunter Association. To prevent more star powder factories from appearing, I requested their cooperation in clearing field-type dungeons across Korea. And they said other guilds would object. But I made conditions and, in exchange, they promised cooperation. With a swirl of shadows, he opened a dungeon gate, the black portal expanding beside him. Now I'll do everything I can to fulfill that condition, he said with a small wave before stepping through. Essel leaned forward eagerly. Then let me help too. You'll call us, right? Suho's final words cut her hopes short. I'll call when I need help. The gate closed behind him, leaving Amit, Essel, and Gray staring at the empty space, frozen in shock. At the D-rank field dungeon, Miho's voice sliced through the tense air. What are our guildmasters thinking? Handing over ownership of every field dungeon to a single hunter, do they understand the impact on guild earnings? Her glare sharpened. And who is this Sung Suho anyway? He didn't even request A-rank or S-rank help. He only dragged us along to fill spots. Sung Jahoon smirked faintly, curiosity gleaming in his eyes. Still, I can't help but be intrigued. A hunter who can strike, mine, and carry all on his own? Aren't you even a little curious? Miho clicked her tongue, irritated. Shh. Sounds like exaggeration. But inwardly she seethed. Even her father believed these stories from the past world. How could he accept them so easily? Jahoon's thoughts were quieter, sharper. A hunter who can level up, huh? Let's see if Guildmaster Choi Dong-in was telling the truth. The apostle observed from a distance, his golden eyes narrowing. His silence carried a weight heavier than any words. Suddenly the ground trembled, a thunderous quake echoing across the mountainside. Dust erupted in the distance. Miho's eyes widened. Could it be? Jahoon's expression mirrored hers, incredulous. It hasn't even been an hour since he entered. Moments later, their doubts were shattered. From the dungeon entrance emerged Suho, calm and steady, his armor gleaming faintly in the sunlight. Behind him, shadow soldiers marched, an oppressive army born from darkness. Suho grinned, wiping the sweat from his brow. Looks like I kept you waiting. He spoke casually, as if he'd only finished a morning workout, instead of clearing an entire dungeon solo. Took down the boss quickly, but mining the essence stones slowed me down. He glanced at the group, the smile widening. I want to hit 3 more locations today. Shall we move on to the next field dungeon? Miho and Jahoon stared, hearts pounding, unable to comprehend his speed and skill. Even for a D-rank dungeon, he had cleared it in under an hour. Their thoughts screamed in unison. From the shadows, the apostle watched silently, lips pressed thin. Suho's growth, combined with the rallying support of the guilds, this could spiral out of my control, he realized. The scene shifted to a conference room where the S-rank hunters had gathered alongside Chairman Woo Jin-chul. His voice remained calm, but worry lingered beneath the surface. Entrusting all field-type dungeons to a single person, is that truly the right decision? Choi Jong-in asked, folding his hands thoughtfully. Those sites are rich sources of mana stones and materials from magical beasts, he added, concern etching his features. Consider the resources we're giving up. Baek Yoon-ho broke the tension with a warm, confident laugh. He clapped a hand on Choi's shoulder. Choi, you're the embodiment of greed, he said half-jokingly, before turning serious. But if the Iterum destroy this world, what use are stones or money? Everything loses value if the world burns. Choi exchanged a glance with Lim Tae-ju, the Grim Reaper Guildmaster. Lim's expression remained cold, his voice sharp as a blade. Those field-type dungeons were where the star powder factories were discovered. I will do whatever it takes to eliminate that substance. The same one that left Lee Min-sung like that. Choi's mind shifted to a different fear. Memories of the colossal alien threats he had faced before. What if the enemies beyond this world are on a similar scale? Could we even stand against such forces? Even Baek lowered his head, recalling the overwhelming powers of those past threats. Chairman Wu Jinchul cut through the unease with a firm, authoritative tone. You're worrying too much. This isn't something we can avoid forever. Suho can handle it. He allowed the pause to linger, then addressed the practical challenge. The plan will face fierce opposition from guilds dependent on field dungeon profits. Convincing hunters like Miho and Park Dojin, those without memories of the previous world, won't be simple. They won't naturally believe in invasion from beyond the stars. Suho's violet eyes narrowed as he met the chairman's. Then how do we persuade them? He asked, his voice taut with urgency. Wu Jinchul exhaled slowly, weighing his words. There's one thing that tends to sway people, he began, naming names with the precision of listing global powerhouses. Thomas Andre of the USA, Lu Jigang of China, Siddharth Bhukshan of India, hunters whose personal power rivals entire nations. People rally around figures like that. The implication was clear. If Suho could achieve recognition on a national level, his influence would be undeniable. Not merely moral, but magnetic. Suho absorbed the weight of the idea, resolve brightening his expression. The scale is enormous, but I am ready. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady and unshakable. In 1 month, I'll be strong enough to persuade any hunter I need to. I'll become a force they cannot ignore. Wu Jinchul shifted the tone back to business, steering the room away from grand declarations. For now, focus on the battles ahead. He opened the heavy door leading into the wider assembly hall. Choi Jang-in, Lim Tae-ju, and Baek Yun-ho followed him. Beyond the door, representatives from regional guilds waited. The Azure Cloud Guild of the Yangseo region, Wang Guild of Yandang County, Daesuns from Hoseo region, and members of the Daechung Guild among them. The hall hummed with tense energy as stakeholders weighed risk against reward. Wu Jinchul moved through the crowd, his thoughts quiet but resolute. We have to do this, for Suho's growth and for the world that depends on it. The decision was made. The work was about to begin. Suho's path of growth continued, relentless and unyielding, preparing him for the storm yet to come. Elsewhere, Suho spent 2 full days clearing dungeons without rest. His fists crushed bone and shattered chitin. Scales cracked beneath his blows. Tearing through goblins, venomous insect swarms, and monstrous centipedes. His mana continued to swell, and the authority of shadow flowed through him with increasing ease, adapting at a terrifying pace. When Suho finally emerged from a collapsing gate, his shadow army followed behind him in perfect formation. Miho and Ki-hoon stood frozen, hearts pounding as the scale of what they had witnessed sank in. 8 dungeons in 2 days. 2 D-rank gates, 4 C-rank gates, and 2 B-rank gates. Ki-hoon muttered that even an A-rank hunter would burn out trying to keep pace. Each time Suho cleared a dungeon, his mana climbed again, an impossible growth curve unfolding right before their eyes. Suho flexed his hand, focusing the energy flowing through his body into his palm. A faint glow shimmered to life. The surge was undeniable. His mana pool had expanded yet again, and with it, the reach of his shadow authority grew smoother, more natural. From nearby, Baru tilted his head. He suggested that Suho could measure his mana against that young S-rank hunter, Park Dojin, but Suho only chuckled and dismissed the idea. He already knew where he stood. As he clenched his fists, the truth became clear. His mana reserves were approaching the threshold of an S-rank hunter. Behind him, Park Dojin, still concealed as an apostle, ground his teeth. Fury simmered beneath the surface, barely restrained. The scene shifted to Suho House. As Suho returned home, his body exhausted, yet his spirit burned brighter than ever. But something felt wrong. The moment he stepped into the hall, instinct screamed at him. Someone was there. In his hand was a framed photograph, Suho's family portrait, Hwang Dong-soo. The air grew heavy, saturated with malice. His presence pressed down like a suffocating fog, a cruel grin spreading across his face. Dong-soo remarked with jagged amusement that it was a shame Suho arrived first. If his family had returned before him, Dong-soo had planned to welcome them properly, with agony, with despair, with the hunger for revenge. As he rose from his seat, the frame slipped from his hand. Glass shattered across the floor, as fragments scattered like pieces of a fragile past. Dong-soo's smirk widened, venomous and unrestrained. Fate, it seemed, had delivered Suho instead. And that would do just fine. The shattered photograph lay ruined at Dong-su's feet. Without hesitation, he ground his boot into the glass. Cold fury settled over Suho like forged steel. His expression hardened. So this was Hwang Dong-su, an S-rank hunter. Woo Jin-chul's warnings echoed in his mind. The younger brother of Hwang Dong-suk, the man behind the Jisun prison break. Some even whispered that Dong-su himself had orchestrated the entire escape. With his brother dead, his rage had turned toward Suho. The warning repeated in his head. If you encounter him, don't fight alone. Run. But Suho didn't move. Breaking the silence, Suho calmly addressed Dong-su by name and asked whether he had come seeking vengeance for his brother. He added that Dong-suk's death was not his doing. It was Kang Taishik who killed him. Dong-su's brow lifted in amusement. The fact that Suho knew both names intrigued him. But vengeance, he said, was not the reason he was there. Someone had sabotaged his plans, and that made him furious. Suho stepped forward. He stated coldly that if Dong-su wanted a fight, they should take it elsewhere. Dong-su's aura erupted outward. He laughed, asking why he should follow a brat's rules. In a blur of motion, Suho's fist struck the wall. The impact cracked concrete and rattled the entire building. Alarms blared. Suho didn't flinch. He stated calmly that within minutes, security and hunters would swarm the area. His uncle didn't leave threats unchecked. Did Dong-su really want to waste time here? Dong-su narrowed his eyes. He scoffed at Suho's confidence. Fine. They would take it elsewhere. Moments later, the two arrived at an abandoned construction site. Suho and Hwang Dong-su faced each other. Dong-su cracked his neck and rolled his shoulders as he stepped forward. He remarked that Suho hadn't flinched back at the house, confirming his suspicion. Suho had reawakened, as he questioned how far Suho had climbed. Had he reached S-rank? Suho's expression remained unreadable. Calmly, he replied that he wouldn't know until he was officially reassessed. But before that, he wanted answers. He asked where Dong-su had obtained the star fragments. He scoffed at the question. Star fragments were rare, he said, and there was no reason he would ever share that kind of information. Suho's thoughts sharpened instantly. That response confirmed it. Dong-su was not being supplied by the apostle of Aterum. Sliding his glasses down slightly, Dong-su's grin twisted into a cruel taunt. He declared that only weaklings relied on artificial boosts. He didn't need such crutches. As he cracked his knuckles, his aura flared violently. He dismissed Suho as nothing more than a lucky brat who stumbled into reawakening. Then he delivered his warning. Not all S-rank hunters were equal. The crushing weight of Dong-su's aura slammed down on Suho. Even so, Suho stood his ground. This was it, his first real fight against an S-rank hunter. Perfect. If this was the test, then he would face it head-on. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, his body slicing through the air as shadow-enhanced power surged into his strike. He needed to know his limits. But Dong-su moved faster. His foot slammed into the ground, detonating power like an earthquake, forming a violent wall. The debris slammed into Suho mid-charge, rattling his bones and throwing his balance into chaos. Pain flared as he ground his teeth. Dong-su was even heavier than Suho had anticipated. The S-rank's eyes burned red as his grin widened. He mocked Suho for daring to fight him directly, sneering that Suho was nothing but a summoner. He demanded to know where Suho's shadow companion was, taunting him to bring it out. Before Suho could respond, Dong-su's fist crashed into his abdomen with the force of a cannon. The impact lifted Suho off his feet and hurled him backward. He slammed into the concrete wall, fractures spiderwebbing outward as dust poured down. The entire building shook violently. Suho collapsed to the ground, pain ripping through his body, but he forced himself upright. Then Dong-su was already there. The S-rank's speed was monstrous. His shadow loomed overhead as his leg came down in a brutal stomp. The ground exploded beneath the impact. This time, Suho barely escaped, leaping back at the last instant. And in that moment, his leg whipped upward in a devastating kick. The blow landed cleanly. Dong-su's head snapped violently to the side, but Dong-su didn't fall. He slowly straightened, rolling his jaw as if merely testing it. His wicked smile remained untouched. Before Suho could reset his stance, Dong-su counterattacked. His fist smashed into Suho's crossed arms with overwhelming force. Even braced, Suho was torn from his footing and hurled backward. Dongsu advanced without pause. As his fists unleashed a relentless barrage, Suho raised his guard, blocking what he could. Dongsu roared over the chaos, mocking Suho's reliance on brute force. Even if Suho unleashed everything he was hiding, he claimed, Suho would never reach his level. Suho's arms trembled, but his eyes remained steady. Yes, Dongsu was overwhelmingly strong. His body was a fortress forged for combat. But Suho had faced something far worse. His mind flashed back to the class change trial, the suffocating dread, the crushing despair, the shadow of his own past that nearly broke him. Compared to that abyss, these blows were survivable, painful, but not overwhelming. That brief reflection cost him. Dongsu's eyes caught the lapse instantly. Crimson energy coiled around his fist like a storm. He snarled that Suho had the audacity to daydream in the middle of a fight. Then he brought his fist down. The punch struck like a god's hammer. Suho's body blasted through the reinforced concrete wall, the structure exploding outward in a deafening roar. Rubble and dust erupted like a volcanic blast as Suho was flung into the night. Dongsu's laughter rang out triumphantly, then abruptly stopped. His eyes dropped to his hand. A jagged shadow blade had pierced straight through it. Dongsu snarled in fury, demanding to know when Suho had summoned the weapon. Dust still hung thick in the air. Within the haze, a battered figure stirred. Suho rose. Bruises darkened his body. His breathing was rough. Behind him, Beru. The Shadow Commander's wings flickered faintly as he asked if the young monarch was unharmed. He admitted that trying to match an enhancement-type S rank head-on without fully tapping into his abilities had been reckless. Still, he stood. His resolve hardened. A bitter thought crossed his mind. How tempting it would be to dump every saved stat point into strength right now. Then the shadows responded. Darkness surged outward. Enough restraint. Suho declared that he would hold nothing back. Shadow armor fully enveloped him, his eyes glowing with a sharp violet light. The air trembled as shadows compressed beneath his feet. The surface split apart beneath the impact, cracks racing outward as debris rained down. Huang Dongsu stood waiting, still grinning. But Suho was no longer the same. His armor had solidified into the form of a shadow knight, radiating lethal authority. His presence swallowed the night itself. Calm and unwavering, Suho announced the second round. The atmosphere shifted instantly. This time, Suho would fight with everything he had. Huang Dongsu's smug confidence he had worn from the start faltered as his gaze locked onto the unnatural armor enveloping Suho's body. He felt it clearly now. The black aura, the suffocating wave of darkness pressing down on his soul. Suho stood completely still. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Dongsu's pupils shrank to pinpoints as an invisible dread tightened around his chest. Memories long buried clawed their way up from the depths of his mind. A towering figure emerged in his recollection, eyes blazing with otherworldly authority. The Shadow Monarch, Sung Jinwoo. The memory struck like a blade. Dongsu remembered that merciless voice, cold and final, asking him what name suited a man who had died consumed by greed. Color drained from his face, his body convulsed violently as shadow seeped from his flesh like tar, dragging him toward a form he had once escaped at all costs. Suho stood at the center of the devastation, dark armor pulsing faintly like fractured obsidian. His calm presence clashed sharply with the chaos around him. His eyes were cold and steady. Dongsu clutched his skull, trembling violently. Broken words spilled from his lips as fractured memories surged back to life. Disjointed flashes of another world, another battlefield. He remembered standing before a man who radiated darkness like a living storm. Every footstep had shaken the earth. Every glance had crushed resistance. Above all, he remembered that gaze, absolute, merciless, final. In that battle, Dongsu had been defeated, broken and consumed by shadow. His breathing grew shallow as panic set in. He wondered if he was hallucinating, until the faint pulse of shadow around Suho made the truth undeniable. Those memories were real. They were his. When Dongsu's eyes met Suho's, recognition struck like a curse. That gaze, he had seen it before. Rage ignited instantly, burning away fear. He snarled a single name with venom. Sung Jinwoo. Suho's brow furrowed in confusion. He questioned how Dong-su knew his father's name. Baru appeared, wings folded tightly. Baru addressed Dong-su by a name Suho had never heard. Greed. He explained that Dong-su had recovered memories of his past existence. In a previous world, Dong-su had fought against the Shadow Monarch and fallen. Afterward, he had been reborn as one of Jinwoo's shadows, bearing the name Greed. What stood before them now was a shadow remembering what it once was. Suho narrowed his eyes. Dong-su was regaining everything, without the aid of a shadow key. Baru confirmed it was possible. If fragments of the past could surface naturally for some, then others were capable of the same awakening. Dong-su's fury snapped into madness. His mind connected the final pieces. Sung Jinwoo, Sung Suho, the family photograph, the resemblance. Realization hit him like lightning. Suho was Jinwoo's son. Another thought followed immediately, sharp and dangerous. If Sung Jinwoo could not interfere, then this was his chance. Before the thought fully formed, Dong-su moved. The ground shattered beneath his feet as he launched forward, red aura erupting like fire. His fist drove toward Suho's chest with blinding speed. Suho reacted instantly, crossing his arms to absorb the blow. The impact detonated outward, shaking the entire structure. Dong-su didn't relent. He pressed forward with a brutal barrage, fists crashing down in relentless succession. Each strike carried monstrous weight. Suho blocked and deflected, shadows reinforcing his defense. But cracks formed under the sheer force. Dong-su grinned. This power, this darkness, it was the same force that had crushed him long ago. This time, Dong-su believed, victory would be his. Yet the memories kept clawing back. The shame, the helplessness, the moment he had knelt before absolute darkness. Fury boiled over. He vowed that Sung Jinwoo would pay by losing his son. Suho's expression hardened instantly. Shadow surged around him once more. He cloaked only his forearms in shadow steel, dark energy spiraling tightly around them. His voice was calm, edged with cold scorn as he stepped forward and questioned why Dong-su looked nervous. The taunt struck deep. Dong-su's aura flared violently as rage consumed him. But Suho no longer met power with power. He moved with precision. He slipped past strikes by inches, deflecting blows with the flat of his blade, pivoting smoothly beneath attacks. His counter came fast and clean, a sharp upward slash. The blade shimmered as shadow extended outward, lengthening into a spear of pure darkness. Suho struck. The spear tore through the air, leaving arcs of shadow behind it. Dong-su stumbled back in shock, clutching his wounds as disbelief filled his eyes. He couldn't understand it. Suho was getting faster and stronger. The ground beneath Suho's boots splintered as his mana surged. There was no hesitation now, only intent. Suho realized that every piece of equipment forged from field-type dungeons granted unique enhancements. Each could be summoned directly through shadow storage, without even opening an inventory. The battlefield answered. From the black haze, shadows rose and condensed into a weapon, an obsidian blade forged from pure darkness. Suho tightened his grip. If he unleashed everything he had built, this fight would end here. Dong-su's instincts screamed danger, but it was already too late. Suho vanished in a burst of shadow. His assault became a torrent. Each weapon struck once, then dissolved, replaced by another in an unbroken storm. The air cracked with every swing. Sparks flew as darkness and force collided, and the battlefield trembled beneath the sun of the Shadow Monarch. Hwang Dong-su struggled to keep his footing. Each clash sent shockwaves through his body. Dong-su staggered back, disbelief spreading across his pale face. His breathing faltered as his thoughts spiraled. He realized Suho was not merely wielding shadow weapons. He was creating them freely. From within Suho's shadow, Baru observed in silence. Even to him, the change was unmistakable. Suho's instincts, control, and combat sense were advancing simultaneously, sharpening with every exchange. Suho turned calmly toward his opponent. Shadows spiraled up his arm once more, condensing into a slim dagger formed entirely from darkness, small, precise, and lethal. Biru lowered his head in reverence. At this pace, he believed it would not be long before the heir of shadows stood beside the monarch himself. And then, Suho vanished. The next, he appeared directly before Huang Dongsu. The daggers moved faster than sight, as Suho unleashed a relentless barrage. Each strike was sharper and deeper than the last, controlled, merciless, unavoidable. Blood burst across Dongsu's body in violent arcs as the assault continued without pause. The final strike sent him flying. Dongsu slammed into the broken earth with a deafening crack, the impact shaking the battlefield itself. When Dongsu forced his eyes open, the world around him wavered, as if time itself had slipped. His gaze locked onto Suho, and fear took root. The stance, the aura, the suffocating killing intent. For a fleeting moment, Dongsu no longer saw Sung Suho alone. The image of another shadow overlapped him. His pulse thundered as instinct screamed at him to flee. His legs buckled, but he forced himself upright. He refused to collapse again. With a roar born of desperation, Dongsu unleashed his remaining power. Mana erupted from his body in a wild surge as he slammed his palms into the ground. A shockwave tore through the battlefield, splitting the earth and shattering the surrounding structure. Using the chaos, Dongsu staggered to his feet and ran through the collapsing ruins. He admitted the truth even as he fled. Suho was stronger than he had expected. Retreat, recover, strike later. He repeated it like a mantra, convincing himself it was strategy rather than fear. He would wait for the right moment. When Suho was vulnerable, a vast shadow fell over him. Dongsu looked up. Suho descended from above, cutting through the dust like a phantom. Before Dongsu could raise his guard, the attack landed. The impact was catastrophic. Mana detonated outward, vaporizing debris mid-air as the ruins shook violently. Smoke and thunder consumed the battlefield. Then, silence. When the haze cleared, two figures remained. Suho's shadow blade was buried deep in Huang Dongsu's chest. Blood seeped through his fingers as he clutched the wound, his breath shallow and uneven. Suho's expression never changed. Dongsu's defiance twisted into desperation as he glared upward, accusing Suho of intending to bind him as a shadow soldier. Even then, he vowed resistance, clinging to hatred that had long since hollowed him out. Suho answered without emotion. Dongsu had failed to surpass even him. What chance had he ever had against Sung Jinwoo? As Suho tightened his grip, Dongsu's last curse faltered. His words drowned in blood as Suho twisted the blade and ended it in a single merciless motion. Huang Dongsu's body convulsed once before collapsing into stillness. The battlefield fell quiet. Shadows receded as Suho stood over the corpse, his weapon dissolving back into darkness. Notifications surfaced before his eyes, signaling his growth. His gaze lingered on the fallen hunter, recognizing the remnants of a past life that hatred had preserved too well. Biru stepped forward eagerly, urging that Dongsu's strength would make a powerful shadow. Suho disagreed. To him, shadow servitude was not a reward. It was a sentence, a battle without end. Still, he raised his hand. Darkness surged. He commanded the abyss. The shadows tried to answer, and failed. Again he commanded them. Again resistance. Even in death, Dongsu's will refused to yield. Biru's fury echoed through the ruins, but Suho silenced it with a calm resolve. Kneeling beside the corpse, he acknowledged the stubborn spark that remained. Not mercy, not salvation, utilization. With a final command, Suho's shadow spread like wings across the shattered ground as his will struck the darkness once more. Outside the ruined building, a lone car screeched to a stop. The engine sputtered once before falling silent, leaving only the hiss of overheated metal in the air. Choi Jong-in and Woo Jin-chul burst out at the same time. Choi scanned the destruction, his gaze sharp and urgent. The explosion had come from this exact location. Woo Jin-chul's face was pale, but his focus never wavered. The damage was far too close to Suho's residence. If a battle had taken place here, they might already be too late. The memory of the emergency alert still weighed heavily on him. The security feed had cut off the moment the breach occurred. Whoever attacked had forced their way inside. Just as they reached the edge of the devastated site, both men froze. A figure emerged from the settling haze. The voice that greeted them was calm, steady, almost casual. It was Suho. Wu Jinchul demanded an explanation, his tone sharp with urgency. He needed to know what had happened and where the intruder was. Suho answered with unsettling calm. Huang Dong-su had been the one who attacked. The name struck like a hammer. For a brief moment, neither man reacted. Choi's eyes widened, while the color drained from Wu Jinchul's face. Huang Dong-su wasn't just an enemy. He was an S-rank criminal who should never have been able to reach this place. When Suho confirmed that the fight had ended in his victory, silence followed. The wind whispered through shattered concrete as the weight of his words settled in. Choi struggled to process it. Defeating Huang Dong-su alone was unthinkable for most hunters. Suho showed no pride as he raised his hand. Dark energy rippled around his arm, condensing like liquid shadow. The power hardened and expanded, forming a massive gauntlet of darkness, jagged, refined, and humming with restrained force. A system notification materialized before him, confirming the creation of a new shadow item of heroic grade. The battle was over. By the following day, the Hunter Association headquarters was in chaos. Camera shutters thundered nonstop as reporters flooded the entrance. Microphones raised, voices overlapping with speculation. Inside, the atmosphere shifted between anxiety and ambition. One man stumbled out of the testing chamber, shoulders slumped, muttering bitterly after being assigned a D rank. A nearby hunter tried to console him, reminding him that D rank still meant stable work and safer assignments. The words helped, but disappointment lingered. A few seats away, another man had been counting quietly. Kim Pan-seok, an unemployed awakened with tired eyes and restless hands, tracked every result under his breath. Several D ranks, a couple of E ranks. The numbers fed his hope. Statistically, the next candidate should score higher. He didn't need greatness, just enough to change his life. Even a B or A rank would be salvation. When the coordinator called the next name, Pan-seok stood on instinct, only to freeze. The name wasn't his Sung Suho. Pan-seok watched the young man rise. Suho looked calm, composed, almost detached. As Suho passed by, Pan-seok forced a crooked grin, silently hoping the newcomer would score low. Suho stepped into the testing chamber. The color drained from Pan-seok's face. His fragile optimism collapsed in an instant. The glass doors at the entrance burst open as a flood of reporters surged inside. Camera flashes blinded the hall as shouts echoed across the marble floor. At the center of it all stood Sung Suho. News spread instantly. A newly awakened S-rank hunter. A reawakening. The hero of the Jisun Correctional Facility incident. Microphones crowded toward him from every angle. Suho scratched the back of his head, overwhelmed, smiling awkwardly as the lights washed over him. Above it all, Wu Jinchul watched from the top floor, standing beside a wide window. Pride shimmered quietly in his eyes. Suho had reached S rank, just as promised. Behind him sat Choi Jong-in, Baek Yoon-ho, and Lim Tae-gyu. Choi acknowledged the inevitability of it. At Suho's current pace, his strength would soon rival that of national-level hunters. With the foundation complete, the next phase could begin. Every remaining field-type dungeon in Korea would be cleared, and after that, the world's hunters would need to be unified. It was the only way to preserve and strengthen the legacy left behind by Sung Jinwoo. Baek crossed his arms, concern etched into his expression. That plan assumed the apostles would remain inactive. They wouldn't. The apostle of Iterum would move soon. Wu Jinchul's gaze remained fixed on Suho below as he spoke of a deeper concern. Though Stardust had been banned, its successor, Star Fragments, had already spread beyond control. Every time investigators closed in, their targets vanished, as if someone was feeding them information. If the Hunter Association itself had been compromised, trust would become a weapon as dangerous as any enemy. Below, the cheers continued. No one noticed the man standing quietly among the reporters. Park De-jin, the apostle. His golden eyes reflected the spotlight surrounding Suho. After a moment, his form shimmered and disappeared without a trace. The scene shifted to an unknown dungeon. Dense mana clogged the air. Deep within the dungeon hall, the apostle of Iterum stood watching as his followers completed their hunt. A massive demon lay sprawled across the ground, its body torn apart piece by piece. Each hunter bore a glowing golden cross upon their forehead, pulsing faintly as they carved into the corpse. The apostle raised his hand. At once, every movement stopped. The hunters froze mid-strike, blood dripping from their weapons before they fell to their knees in perfect unison. As the apostle stepped forward, his presence spread outward like creeping frost, silencing even the hum of the dungeon itself. The apostle's gaze swept over them. Even A-rank hunters could no longer endure prolonged exposure to star fragments. Their strength had limits. They were powerful, yet incomplete, unworthy of true ascension. His thoughts shifted. Since Sung Suho's awakening, the balance had begun to tilt. Guilds were falling under Suho's influence. Territory was being absorbed, authority consolidated. It had become a contest of dominance. Whoever gathered more awakened hunters and controlled more fields would claim the advantage. With Korea's strongest hunters rallying behind Suho, expanding within this region was pointless. Even with hundreds of loyal followers, a direct confrontation offered no guarantee of victory. That realization tightened his grip. His true objective had never changed, the dominion of darkness itself. And yet Sung Suho had become an unexpected variable, one that refused to be ignored. When the next star fragment descended, no, when the fifth fragment entered his grasp, that authority would finally be his. A confident smile touched his lips, sharp and deliberate, the expression of a hunter moments before the kill. Then, a voice echoed from behind him. The apostle froze. Slowly he turned. A young woman stood at the dungeon entrance. She claimed to have been separated from her party and asked to join them. Her warmth felt wrong. The apostle responded instantly. A streak of golden light tore through the air. The woman's skull was pierced in a single merciless strike. Her body collapsed, blood splattering across the stone floor. The apostle lowered his arm without hesitation. This dungeon belonged to the Grim Reaper Guild. Trespassers were not permitted to live. For a brief moment, silence returned. Then came laughter. Low, wrong. The corpse twitched. The woman's voice echoed again, distorted and layered. Her body twisted violently. The human shape peeled away, revealing an insectoid monstrosity beneath. She rose, half human, half creature, wearing a grin filled with mockery. The apostle's golden eyes flared as he demanded her identity. The creature introduced herself as Arsha, an existence from another world. She claimed she had come not as an enemy, but with a proposal. Suspicion sharpened the apostle's expression. He demanded to know how she even knew who he was. Arsha answered easily. She made it her business to uncover secrets. While tracing the origin of Stardust, she had followed its trail straight to the one manipulating events from the shadows. That was when she realized the truth. The apostle of Iterum was not of this world. As she spoke, faint swarms of shimmering insects stirred around her shoulders, buzzing softly like living spies. She praised them as her informants. Before she could continue, one of the apostle's followers struck. Golden light flashed, cleaving one of the insects apart. In the same heartbeat, every follower moved. Weapons pierced Arsha from all directions, impaling her body again and again. Yet she showed no pain. She glanced down at the weapons embedded in her flesh, calm and almost amused. Cracks spread across her skin like shattered glass, leaking black mist. She explained that the body before them was only a projection. Destroying it meant nothing. The fractures sealed. Her form restored itself. She hadn't come to expose him. She had come to offer power. From within her cloak, Arsha produced a glowing shard. The air trembled the moment it appeared. A refined star fragment. When the apostle accepted it, the shard hovered briefly before settling into his palm. The energy was dense, yet perfectly stable. Arsha explained its value. Even S-rank hunters could be bent with this power. She could provide more, enough to reshape the battlefield entirely. In exchange, she wanted only one thing: the destruction of Sung Suho and the Shadow Monarch. The apostle questioned her loyalty. Why would someone from this world side with him? Arsha dismissed the notion of allegiance. Loyalty to her was meaningless without reward. When the apostle noted that she hadn't appeared before Lee Min-sung's death, her smile faded, just slightly. Tension thickened the air. Arsha warned him lightly against prying too deeply. Then she turned away, speaking as if casually. She claimed she wasn't so different from Sung Suho. Like him, she was an heir to a monarch's power. But unlike Suho, she had learned a crucial truth. Paths born of shadow could never be shared. She studied the apostle carefully, noting the alien nature of his presence. Similar to Suho's, yet not the same. Her power did not originate from shadows. With a subtle gesture, the corpse of the slain demon behind him began to move. Bones snapped back into place. Dead eyes burned crimson as the creature rose, roaring as it charged. The apostle did not move. With a single dismissive remark, he criticized her technique. The monster froze. Blood erupted from every opening before its skull collapsed inward, obliterated in an instant. The remains dissolved into mist. An obsidian insect fluttered down onto Arsha's finger. She revealed herself then, the successor of the plague monarch. What they had witnessed was only a fragment of her power. Her crimson gaze locked with the apostle's golden eyes. The enemy of your enemy. Wasn't that an ally? The apostle remained silent. Arsha stepped closer, her voice persuasive. Together, she claimed, they could dominate this world instead of tearing it apart separately. The dungeon's shadows deepened. Not long after, Arsha stepped through a separate dungeon gate. The air inside was cool and dense with mana, alive as if breathing on its own. Two figures were already waiting within, their presence unmistakable. They welcomed her back immediately, their questions overlapping. Had the negotiation succeeded? Did Park Do-jin accept? Did the apostle agree to the deal? Arsha let out a quiet, satisfied laugh. He agreed. Park Do-jin will lend us his strength. The smaller of the two, Pia, broke into a grin and pumped a fist into the air, clearly delighted. Arsha chuckled and lightly rested a hand on his head. She warned him not to celebrate too soon. This was only one step forward. Behind them, the third figure remained silent. Park Do-jin accepted far too easily. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she considered the implications. Perhaps he already understands that the shadow monarch will eventually stand in his way. A thin smile curved her lips. In the distance, a system window materialized before her eyes, glowing with deep blood-red text. Quest: Path to Monarch Ascension. Objective: form an alliance with the Eterum Apostle. Pia and the silent figure halted instantly, both sensing the terrifying aura pouring from her. Arsha's smile deepened. She spoke calmly. They were no longer far from claiming their rightful positions as monarchs. The truth hung heavy in the air, cold, thrilling, and irreversible. Meanwhile, in Seoul, inside a quiet high-rise office, a contract lay open between two people, the ink beside it still fresh. A man in a flawless gray suit spoke carefully, maintaining a professional tone. The Fame Guild was organizing an A-rank gate subjugation, and they wanted him as the lead hunter. Across from him sat Lee Yun-suk, a freelance hunter, calm and still, his expression unreadable. He didn't even glance at the contract, as he spoke in a low, steady voice. He had already refused. He would not accept requests involving anything above A rank. The negotiator leaned forward, frustration slipping through his composure. Someone with his ability was wasting his potential. Lee pressed trembling fingers to his temple. No amount of money or recognition would ever drag him back into that nightmare. The assistant tried to reason with him. Surely an A-rank dungeon would be manageable. Her words broke him. His voice cracked as memories surged back. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. The monsters, their teeth, their claws, the pain. His body shook as he spoke, breath uneven, fear barely contained. Rank meant nothing when you were screaming for your life. Silence swallowed the room. In a hoarse whisper, Lee asked them to leave. The representatives quietly gathered their things and exited. In the hallway, the assistant hesitated. Was it really over? Her superior adjusted his tie and sighed. That man was no longer an S-rank hunter, just an empty shell. They failed to notice the tall figure brushing past them in the opposite direction. His steps were slow, intentional. Inside Lee Yun-suk's apartment, a soft knock echoed. No answer. The door opened anyway. Lee froze as the intruder stepped inside. The pressure filling the room was suffocating. He recognized that presence instantly. A Reaper Guild member. Lee snapped at him, accusing him of crossing boundaries. The man ignored the hostility. His voice was calm, almost gentle. He said he had come because he heard of an S-rank hunter who trembled at the sight of monsters. Lee's mana surged in response, lightning dancing across his arms. One more step, and the man would be ash. But the apostle moved first. In a single blur, he pressed a radiant star fragment against Lee's forehead. Light exploded. Lee's scream was swallowed by the roar of energy flooding his body. The apostle whispered that Lee no longer needed to be afraid. From that moment on, he would never face monsters again. Golden light spread through Lee's veins. His body went rigid. The apostle observed him closely, satisfied. If the fragment took hold, Lee would become the perfect servant. His thoughts drifted to Sung Suho and Arsha, two heirs standing on opposite sides of the coming storm. The board was shifting. The tide was turning in his favor. As the apostle turned to leave, Lee's body twitched behind him. Slowly, Lee lifted his head. His eyes burned with divine brilliance. Every trace of humanity was gone. The apostle paused and smiled quietly. Even the strongest walls, he thought, always collapse from within. The scene shifted to the National Air Control Tower. Rows of monitors flickered endlessly. Radar screens pulsed in steady rhythm. Dozens of aircraft moved smoothly through the country's airspace. Everything was normal, until one screen flashed red. A burst of static ripped through a controller's headset, followed by a strained, shaking voice. Flight KAL-472 was requesting immediate contact. The operator straightened at once and acknowledged the call, signaling the pilot to speak. The response came uneven, edged with disbelief. The aircraft was cruising at flight level 570 on approach to South Korea. But the pilot had a question. The controller frowned, asking what kind of issue could arise at that altitude. After a brief hesitation, the pilot asked if snowfall was even possible so high above the clouds. The room went quiet. The controller denied it immediately. There was no precipitation above the cloud layer. Snow was impossible. The pilot let out a nervous laugh, agreeing. That was exactly why he was concerned. Then his tone shifted. Through the cockpit windows, the clouds were no longer white. The sky itself rippled, distorting like water under pressure. Above them, a colossal shadow began to form. Space twisted inward, spiraling like a vortex of empty light. The captain's grip tightened on the controls as realization struck. It was a gate. A dungeon gate, opening in the upper atmosphere. Down in the control tower, the controller demanded confirmation. Static crackled. Then the pilot's voice returned, breathless and panicked. A violent storm had formed instantly. Snow, ice, and raging wind. Visibility had dropped to zero. The aircraft was losing altitude. An emergency landing was requested. The transmission cut off. For a single heartbeat, the room was silent. Then chaos followed. The operator stared at the radar, his hand trembling. A gate had opened in the sky. Elsewhere, deep within a field-type dungeon, a massive wolf roared. Its fangs dripped with black venom, crimson eyes blazing with hunger as it lunged forward. A flash of motion sliced through the darkness, too fast to track. The beast froze midair. Thin crimson lines spread across its massive body, and in the next instant, it was torn apart, shredded into pieces before it ever hit the ground. Sung Suho landed silently among the remains, his shadow dagger humming with residual power. The black gauntlet on his arm, greed, gleamed faintly, its surface pulsing as if alive. Suho exhaled, irritation flickering across his expression. He realized he had forgotten to activate greed's active skill. Again. At least the passive boost was still working. A system notification appeared. His stats surged upward. Strength increased significantly. Suho's gaze hardened. The mining was complete. Before the dungeon collapsed, it was time to leave. A chime sounded. The system confirmed his shadow storage was maxed out. 340 out of 340. Suho frowned slightly. It was time to recycle the weaker shadows and forge something stronger. He inhaled slowly and extended his hand. The shadows responded. Darkness exploded outward like a tidal wave, flooding the cavern in black light. The walls shook violently as Suho's aura surged, bending mana itself under its pressure. It was the unmistakable weight of a monarch's authority. The dungeon system reacted instantly. Shadow creation has leveled up. The probability of generating higher-grade items had increased. Suho blinked, stunned. Then a grin spread across his face. Without hesitation, he opened his inventory. Space warped as hundreds of weapons materialized mid-air, each humming with shadow-infused energy. Their forms floated in perfect formation, resonating with his mana. This time, there were fewer low-grade items, more advanced equipment. His attention finally settled on a newly forged pair of gauntlets, sleek, dark, edged with faint violet mist, a heroic grade item. Suho examined it carefully. The stats were solid, but still inferior to greed. Disappointing, but useful. He stored it away as the dungeon began to collapse. Suho walked calmly toward the exit, stepping out just as the dungeon imploded behind him. Suho took a breath. Thanks to the association pressuring the guilds, field-type dungeons were still accessible. But something felt wrong. There was still no sign of the Stardust factories. Had they already predicted his movements? As he turned toward the waiting transport, a field agent hurried over, bowing deeply in thanks. Before the report could finish, Emergency Association summons, all hunters report. Immediately, Suho's expression darkened. An emergency call, sent to every hunter. Something big had just happened. The scene fast-forwarded to the Hunter Association headquarters. Tension clung to the air like static electricity. Guildmasters, executives, and elite hunters filled the massive conference hall. Conversations were low, restrained, and uneasy. Among them, Park Jang-soo, an A-rank hunter, did his best to remain unnoticed. He swallowed hard, glancing around at the figures seated nearby. Leaders who decided the fate of the country with a single word. At the head of the table sat Baek Yun-ho, leader of the White Tiger Guild. His sharp gaze swept across the room before he finally spoke. Everyone already knew why they had been summoned. Choi Jong-in of the Hunters Guild leaned forward, calmly stating the obvious. The meeting concerned the gate that had appeared above South Korea. Across the table, Lim Taegyu of the Reaper Guild folded his arms. His voice remained controlled. The question now was who would be responsible for claiming it. A deep laugh shattered the tension. Ma Dong-wook, the publicity-loving leader of the Fame Guild, leaned back with a smug grin. Ownership, in his view, was already decided. Naturally, the Fame Guild would take charge. He turned his attention toward Lim Taegyu, his smile sharpening as he casually brought up a rumor. The Reaper Guild had finally secured the freelance S-rank hunter Lee Yun-seok, something other guilds had failed to do for months. Lim's expression didn't change. His response was smooth and detached. It hadn't been his doing. The one responsible was Park Dojin. Lim had merely benefited from the outcome. Before anyone could press further, the heavy conference doors swung open. Every head turned. Sung Suho stepped inside, a faint sheen of sweat still clinging to his forehead. He bowed lightly, apologizing for his delay and explaining that he had come straight from clearing a field-type dungeon. A ripple of shock moved through the hall. Park Jang-soo stiffened. Ma Dong-wook's eyes widened. The reawakened S-rank hunter himself. Ma Dong-wook immediately strode forward, grabbing Suho's hand with exaggerated enthusiasm and calling him Coach Sung, clearly thrilled by the encounter. Suho blinked, visibly confused, awkwardly correcting him. He wasn't a coach. Park Jang-soo seized the opportunity, eagerly pitching his guild. Since Suho was still unaffiliated, why not join the Knights Guild? They would offer unmatched support and compensation. Ma Dong-wook cut in instantly, promising even more. Double the pay, top-tier equipment, and complete freedom under the Fame Guild's banner. At the head of the table, Choi Jong-in muttered quietly to himself. It felt painfully familiar. Suho laughed softly and raised his hands, politely declining both offers. He had no intention of joining a guild, for now. The two guild leaders exchanged awkward looks as their excitement deflated. Choi Jong-in hid a faint smirk. Another rejection, just like the past. As silence returned, Suho scanned the room. Every seat was filled with hunters tied to a guild. He realized something then. He was the only unaffiliated one present. The thought crossed his mind. Perhaps it was time to form his own guild, one that could unite independent hunters instead of dividing them. Before he could dwell on it, the doors opened again. Woo Jin-chul entered, his expression grim. A female assistant followed closely behind, arms full of documents. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Ma Dong-wook tried to lighten the mood, joking that Woo looked unwell. Woo paused briefly, clearly irritated, before dismissing the comment. He explained curtly that he had been organizing data. His tone was sharper than usual. Setting the documents down, Woo thanked everyone for arriving on such short notice. Then he delivered the news. A gate had appeared above South Korea the previous day. The first report had come from flight KAL-472. He hesitated. The aircraft had been caught in the magical turbulence surrounding the gate and had gone down. There were heavy casualties. A murmur spread through the hall. Woo continued, explaining that A-rank teams had already measured the gate's energy levels. The readings exceeded all known limits. The Hunter Association had officially classified it as an S-rank gate. The room went silent. Suho's eyes narrowed. An S-rank gate, the first since the Great Cataclysm. Choi Jong-in gripped the edge of the table, muttering that this was exactly what they had feared. An aerial S-rank gate meant no safe perimeter, no easy containment. Even veteran hunters looked uneasy. Suho studied their faces. He spoke calmly, suggesting that with cooperation and strategy, the situation could still be handled. Biru emerged from Suho's shadow. Biru stated coldly that even if everyone present combined their strength, they would still be helpless before what awaited beyond the gate. Ma Dong-wook stared in horror, recognizing the summoned beast rumored to belong to Sung Suho. His body trembled uncontrollably as primal fear overtook him. Suho snapped Biru's name sharply and struck him on the head, scolding him for terrifying allies and ordering him back into the shadows. Biru lowered himself, apologizing, but insisted he spoke from knowledge. He explained that in the previous world, the being that commanded an S-rank gate and annihilated countless S-rank hunters had been himself, the Ant King. The realization sent a silent shockwave through the room. Choi Jong-in stiffened. Baek Yoon-ho's eyes widened as the pieces aligned. This was the same species once summoned by Sung Jinwoo. At that name, Biru's aura surged violently. Ancient dominance flooded the hall. His voice carried pride older than the world itself as he declared that their instincts recognized him for a reason. He ordered them to kneel. The moment shattered when Suho struck him again, scolding him for threatening people on their side. Biru folded his wings, muttering an embarrassed apology. It had simply been too long since he had felt that level of authority. Choi Jong-in turned to Suho, asking carefully if an S-rank gate could be cleared with Biru alone. Suho shook his head. Biru was weakened. Whatever power he once held, he no longer possessed it fully. Biru dramatically lamented the cruelty of those words. Park Jang-soo and Ma Dong-wook exchanged confused glances, whispering that they didn't understand anything anymore. Choi Jong-in adjusted his glasses. Perhaps memories would explain better than words. He asked Suho if it was possible to allow others to regain their past memories. Suho nodded. From the shadows, he drew out the shadow key. Its ominous aura rolled across the room like cold fog. Park Jang-soo and Ma Dong-wook recoiled instinctively, repeating the words in disbelief. Past memories. Park's voice trembled as the realization settled in. The world truly had been reset. Ma's complexion drained of color as another memory surfaced. An S-rank gate, one like Jeju Island. The implication made his breath hitch. Facing a calamity of that scale again felt unbearable. Woo Jin-chul stepped forward, his expression grim. He explained that once a gate appeared, a dungeon break would occur 7 days later. If an S-rank dungeon broke above Seoul, the devastation would be beyond calculation. Park struggled to process the information and questioned whether monsters emerging in the sky would simply fall to their deaths. Woo Jin-chul shook his head. The association had already investigated. The gate's altitude was steadily decreasing. At the current rate, when the dungeon break occurred on the 7th day, the gate would descend directly above Central Seoul. Silence crushed the room. Park collapsed back into his chair, muttering in disbelief. A moving gate meant there was no escape. They would have to clear it. The words lingered heavily in the air. No one spoke. Baek Yoon-ho sat rigid, staring at his clenched fists. Memories stirred, warnings from the past. They had once fought a war against incomprehensible entities, and now, before those horrors had even returned, they were already faltering before a single S-rank gate. His gaze drifted to Suho, the young hunter who had defeated Huang Dong-su with ease. Yunho felt a tightening in his chest. Suho was different, far stronger than any of them had realized. The trembling in his hands betrayed how powerless he felt. When had he last felt this weak? No one dared break the silence. At last, Lim Tae-gyu exhaled slowly, his voice cutting through the tension. He stated that the only reason they had survived an S-rank dungeon in the past was because he had been there. Choi Jong-in lowered his gaze. He didn't need clarification. If only Sung Jinwoo were present. The name passed through the room like a cold wind. No one objected. Their silence was agreement. Every hunter there felt the same truth clawing at their thoughts. Without him, survival was uncertain. Suho frowned as he observed them. To him, these were veterans who had faced death countless times. Yet now they looked like people standing before an unavoidable catastrophe. He turned toward Beru, confusion evident. He asked why they were reacting this way. Beru responded calmly, his voice layered with reverence. He told Suho not to shoulder their fear. When his former liege had defeated him, that power had already surpassed what Suho currently possessed. Suho froze. The realization struck hard. His father had been stronger than he was now. For a moment, doubt twisted in his chest. Could he truly overcome a threat that even his father had once confronted? Could he fill the void left behind? Then memory answered. The night of his class advancement, his father's shadow was not something to chase. It was something to surpass. Suho straightened, resolve hardening within him. Around him, fear continued to erode the hunter's confidence. They were all thinking the same thing. Without Sung Jinwoo, they were doomed. Suho clenched his jaw. Fear would save no one. The gate was already here. Ready or not, action was the only answer. At that moment, a system window shimmered into view. Quest S-rank gate. Objective: mobilize all available strength to clear the S-rank gate in the sky. Suho's gaze sharpened. Even the system expected him to lead. As he studied the glowing text, something brushed his shoulder. Cold, fleeting, like smoke shaped into a hand. He spun around instantly. The room was still, the doors closed, yet the presence felt disturbingly familiar. Choi Jong-in noticed Suho's sudden shift and quietly asked if something was wrong. Suho didn't answer immediately. The system's words echoed in his mind. Everything the player can do. The system wasn't asking for help. It was reminding him that the solution lay within his own choices. He turned toward Baek Yunho, his voice steady. He asked if Yunho specialized in close-range combat. Startled, Yunho confirmed it. Suho reached into his inventory. Shadows rippled around his arm as he retrieved an item he had stored long ago. He told Yunho that this would suit him. From the darkness emerged a pair of gauntlets forged from shadow itself, their surfaces pulsing faintly like living metal. Suho explained calmly that he had obtained them from a field-type dungeon. He named them White Tiger Fist. A system chime echoed. Item: Shadow Gauntlets. White Tiger Fist, rank: heroic. Baek Yunho stared at the equipment, awe written across his face. The gauntlets seemed to breathe, shadows shifting beneath their surface. He said he wanted to test something, whether Yunho would help him. The moment they entered the dungeon, the massive stone gates sealed shut behind them with a deep, thunderous echo. Mana surged through the cavern, crackling through the air like static before a storm. This was where the real test would begin. Inside the dim passage, the scent of scorched stone mixed with lingering traces of monster blood. The atmosphere was heavy, oppressive, and alive with power. Near the entrance, Park Jong-soo, Ma Dong-wook, Lim Tae-gyu, and Choi Jong-in stood in a loose semicircle, their attention fixed deeper within the dungeon. Choi Jong-in adjusted his glasses, carefully scanning the vast interior. From his assessment alone, it was clear this was a B-rank gate. Yet something felt off. They hadn't come here for a normal raid. They had followed Sung Suho, and none of them understood his true intention. From farther inside the dungeon, the sounds of combat echoed violently. The roars of mana beasts collided with the deafening impact of fists striking flesh, bone, and stone. At the center of that chaos stood Baek Yunho. His arms were wrapped in black, living shadows, gauntlets forged from Suho's power. Every movement he made was sharp and decisive. Each strike tore through the air like thunder, carrying overwhelming force. The beast lunged at him in waves, but none lasted more than moments. Bones shattered, stone walls cracked, bodies collapsed into fading mana dust. From a distance, Suho observed silently beside Wu Jinchul. The association chairman's expression tightened as he turned toward the young hunter. He questioned why Baek Yun-ho had been sent alone into combat, especially when this wasn't a standard dungeon operation. Suho remained calm. After a brief pause, he explained that this battle was an experiment. He was testing how his shadow-forged equipment performed in live combat. The answer stunned Wu Jinchul. Equipment created by shadows. Suho confirmed it. His power resembled his father's, but it wasn't the same. Sung Jinwoo's soldiers had existed indefinitely, growing stronger with every victory. Suho's creations, however, were temporary. They burned out after a single day, vanishing completely. He couldn't recreate what his father had done. Wu Jinchul said nothing, but the weight of those words lingered heavily. Power inherited from a monarch still came with limits and burdens. Then Suho raised his hand. Black mist coiled around his wrist, solidifying into a shadow gauntlet that gleamed faintly under the dungeon's dim light. His eyes sharpened with quiet resolve. Even if his power differed, it still had potential. Suho explained that his shadow creation skill transformed fallen shadows into equipment, and unlike ordinary gear, these items evolved. As they leveled up, they inherited the combat instincts and statistics of the shadows used to forge them. Realization struck Wu Jinchul instantly. That meant the gauntlet Baek Yun-ho was using wasn't just a weapon. It was something that grew stronger through battle. Choi Jong-in stepped forward, his analytical mind racing. If that were true, then not only would the weapon grow, but the wielder would as well. Their strength would develop together. Suho nodded. That was his theory. Now he needed proof. They turned back toward the battlefield just as Baek Yun-ho sent another beast flying into the dungeon wall. Dust and stone erupted on impact. With every strike, the shadow gauntlets pulsed, reacting as though they were alive. Baek could feel it. The equipment was responding to him. His movements felt sharper, his power more focused. It was as though the gauntlets were learning his rhythm, amplifying his instincts. Another monster lunged. Baek dodged, pivoted, and crushed it with a single blow that shattered the ground beneath his feet. As the creature dissolved into mana dust, he stared at his shadow-clad hands in disbelief. The moment he had equipped the gauntlets, something deep inside him had awakened. A system window appeared before his eyes. An active skill, ambush. Without hesitation, Baek activated it. His body blurred, closing the distance instantly. The ground cracked beneath his landing as his strike obliterated the target. From a distance, Suho and Wu Jinchul watched in silence. With each exchange, Baek's movements became cleaner, faster, more refined. He was evolving in real time. Then another system notification appeared, this time before Suho. The shadow item, White Fist, had leveled up. The gauntlet's manifestation stat increased. Baek lowered his arm, sensing the change ripple through his body. His movements felt lighter, yet every strike carried greater precision. Suho finally turned toward the other S-rank hunters gathered nearby. His voice was calm but firm with purpose. They had 6 days before the S-rank gate broke. Before that happened, he would forge equipment for every one of them. Silence filled the dungeon. Then disbelief followed. Equipment that grew stronger alongside its user sounded impossible. Instead of arguing, Suho raised his hand. Shadows gathered at his fingertips, forming a sleek obsidian gauntlet. Dark energy flared outward as he clenched his fist. The trials ahead wouldn't be easy, but they wouldn't face them alone. The tension in the room shifted. Fear gave way to excitement. Park Jong-soo and Dong-wook stepped forward first, already debating enhancements and combat roles. Lim Tai-gu argued for range priorities. Their voices overlapped, energy returning to the group. Suho laughed softly, raising his hands to calm them. He explained that he didn't control the attributes. Each piece depended on the shadow used to forge it. That revelation only fueled their excitement further. From a distance, Wu Jinchul watched quietly. It reminded him of another time, another hunter. Sung Jinwoo had carried the world alone. His strength had been absolute, but solitary. Suho was different. His power connected people. It unified them. Watching him lead, Woo Jin-chul felt something stir in his chest. This time, it wouldn't be one man against the world. This time, they would fight together. The scene shifted far away from Korea, across the ocean in the United States. Outside the headquarters of the Scavenger Guild, rested one of the most feared hunters in the world, Thomas Andre, a national-level hunter, the strongest among humanity. Slowly his assistant approached. With steady confidence, she reminded him that he was overlooking something important. She mentioned his visit to the Azure Guild and his upcoming planned trip to Korea. A faint smirk appeared on his face. He remembered that name, Sung Suho. To him, it was still too early. Too early to make a move. Too early to interfere. He compared it to picking fruit before it had fully ripened. The assistant hesitated. She didn't understand at first. So Thomas explained. The Azure Guild had already been crushed once. Their reputation still hadn't recovered. Even the Scavenger Guild had suffered losses during that conflict. Now, Suho was awakening again, reaching S rank. If he traveled to Korea now, there would be nothing to gain. No advantage, no reward, no benefit. The assistant paused, then carefully asked about Randolph, his fallen comrade. For a brief moment, the atmosphere changed. Thomas slowly closed his eyes, burdened by memory. He admitted that he had never wanted revenge. He had never wanted bloodshed. He only wanted one thing, that Randolph's death would never be forgotten. Slowly, he raised his hand toward the sky, a silent salute, a promise to the fallen. After that, the assistant handed him a new report. Thomas accepted it. His eyes scanned the screen. Light reflected softly off his glasses. The information was clear. In Korea, a newly formed S-rank gate, the first since the Great Cataclysm, a worldwide emergency request, a global call for aid. A slow smile spread across Thomas's face. Predatory, dangerous. The fruit had finally ripened. He stood up. Without hesitation, he gave his command. The aircraft was to be prepared. Korea was to be informed. The Scavenger Guild would respond. Immediately, the assistant confirmed the order and left. Thomas remained behind, his gaze hardened like steel. For Randolph, for honor, for justice, he would make the world pay its dues. The scene shifted back to Korea. Deep inside a dangerous dungeon, Choi Jong-in sat in silence. In his palm rested a strange object, a bracelet made of shifting darkness. Its surface moved constantly, like smoke molded into metal, like shadows given life. A system window floated before him. Heroic rank bracelet. Effects: enhanced flame damage, increased defense, active skill, rapid burn. Suho explained that he had crafted the bracelet specifically for Choi, designed for his flames, for his battles, for his fighting style. Choi nodded seriously. Gratitude filled his eyes. He expressed his sincere appreciation. As he turned the bracelet in his hand, feeling the gentle heat beneath its surface, something changed inside him, for the first time in years. Becoming stronger no longer felt like a fantasy. He then mentioned something else. He had heard that Suho was creating similar equipment for all the hunters, for every ally, for the entire team. He questioned whether it was too much for one person. Suho tried to smile. He claimed he was managing. He said everything was under control, that all equipment from the previous meeting had already been completed. But his body revealed the truth. Dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking, breathing uneven. He was barely holding himself together. Before Choi could say more, Baru emerged, the loyal shadow ant. His eyes focused on Suho with deep concern. Baru knew the truth. 2 days of nonstop hunting, no proper rest, no real sleep, followed by long nights completing system quests, gathering materials, forging equipment, even healing potions couldn't hide the strain. Suho was destroying himself for everyone else. Baru felt both pride and fear. Then, Suho's body finally gave up. A long, uncontrollable yawn escaped him, so wide, so sudden, that even he looked surprised afterward. Choi watched silently. To him, Suho hadn't just worked hard. He had drained himself completely. He had pushed beyond his limits, again and again, just so others could stand stronger. If Suho was going this far, then he couldn't fall behind. He couldn't stay weak. No excuses, no hesitation, no retreat. Suho lifted the final pair of Shadow Forge gauntlets. His hands trembled. He exhaled shakily. He explained that once he delivered them to Association President Woo Jin-chul, he would finally rest. Choi immediately said he would go with him. Suho tried to refuse. He said it wasn't necessary, but Choi stepped forward with determination. He explained that it wasn't about following. He had his own meeting to attend. Then, he paused and revealed the truth. Thomas Andre was coming to Korea. Suho froze. His body stiffened. His breathing stopped. Thomas Andre, the national-level hunter. The scene fast-forwarded to the Hunter Association headquarters. The massive building buzzed with tension. Sung Suho and Choi Jong-in walked side by side through the corridor. Their footsteps echoed sharply. As they turned the corner toward the conference hall, they stopped. A wall of hunters blocked their path. Dozens of men and women in black uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder. He quietly remarked that there were far too many hunters gathered near the president's office. Choi answered in a low voice. These were Thomas Andre's people, the Scavenger Guild. He lifted his hand, signaling Suho to stop. Choi calmly instructed him to wait outside. Suho didn't argue. Instead, he stepped back and studied them, their posture, their killing intent. He recognized them. This was the same guild that had tried to seize control in the pyramid dungeon. His expression darkened. They were here for the S-rank gate, just like everyone else. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was sharp enough to cut glass. The moment Choi Jong-in entered and closed the door behind him, he felt the pressure. Woo Jin-chul sat at the table. Across from him sat Thomas Andre and his assistant, Laura. Choi took a seat beside him and bowed slightly. He formally introduced himself as a representative of the Hunters Guild. As soon as he looked at Thomas, his pulse tightened. The pressure radiating from the man wasn't human. It felt like staring into the jaws of something colossal. He casually returned the greeting, as if dominance came naturally to him. His assistant stepped forward. She didn't waste time. She immediately presented the Scavenger Guild's conditions. Their terms were clear. First, Korea would not accept support from any other nation, only the Scavenger Guild. Second, the Scavenger Guild would receive 80% of all resources from the gate. The room darkened instantly. Woo Jin-chul repeated the number in disbelief. 80%. It was outrageous, unacceptable. Thomas responded with a thin smile. He reminded them that Korea had asked for help because they couldn't clear the gate alone. If a dungeon break happened, the consequences would be catastrophic. Compared to that, he claimed the price was generous. The temperature in the room dropped. Choi muttered quietly. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to dominate. Woo Jin-chul took a slow breath. He stated clearly, Korea requested help due to uncertainty, not weakness. And now, they had two newly awakened S-rank hunters. With that, the offer was rejected. They would seek help elsewhere. Thomas's smile vanished. The air trembled. His relaxed posture disappeared. Something darker emerged. His voice dropped. He asked if they had heard about the Egypt field-type dungeon. He explained that Randolph had died there, one of their elites. Several others had fallen as well. The Asura Guild had been present. So had Korean hunters. Afterward, rumors spread that Scavenger had fallen behind Asura in strength. To erase that insult, he had personally visited Asura. And there, one of their hunters revealed a name. He asked Laura to remind them. She turned calmly toward Woo Jin-chul and Choi and spoke without mercy. The name was Sung Suho. The room froze. Woo Jin-chul stiffened. Choi's eyes widened. Hearing Suho's name felt like thunder. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. His irritation had become predatory. He warned them, if Korea rejected their offer, then Scavenger would demand compensation for Randolph, and that compensation would be Suho's life. Thomas stretched mockingly. He suggested that maybe Suho would try to stop him. That idea amused him, but Choi understood. If fighting broke out now, Suho would be doomed, with apostles looming, with the gate approaching, with scavenger ready to explode. Conflict meant ruin. Choi lowered his gaze. His shoulders felt chained. Then, a furious voice exploded from outside. Someone accused Scavenger of acting like thieves. One shouted angrily, demanding to know who allowed this. But the footsteps didn't stop. A voice ordered them to move, politely, while they still could. The doors burst open. Sung Suho entered, forcing his way inside. He ordered the guards to step aside. They tried to restrain him, but an invisible force slammed into them. Thomas and Laura turned, shock turning to irritation. Woo Jin-chul and Choi stood instantly. They called out his name, demanded to know what he was doing. Suho ignored their worry. He apologized for interrupting and promised to take responsibility later. But he refused to stay silent. Choi pleaded with him in asking what he was planning. Suho answered with action. He spread his arms. And more scavenger hunters dropped, faces pale, bodies trembling. Suho looked directly at Thomas and addressed him calmly. If Thomas was truly a national-level hunter, then his guild should act like one. He stepped forward. Shadows gathered behind him, like living creatures. He proposed new terms. Whoever reached the gate first kept what they earned. If Scavenger was truly stronger, then claiming more than 80% should be easy. Woo Jin-chul and Choi stared in horror. This wasn't bravery. This was pouring fuel on fire. Thomas stood slowly. A wild grin spread across his face. Excitement replaced irritation. He approached Suho. Each step heavy, each step dangerous. He stopped inches away, towering over him, laughing. He praised Suho's courage, then asked what would happen if he crushed him. Suho didn't flinch. He answered calmly. Then Scavenger would earn the reputation of traveling across the world, only to throw a tantrum and gain nothing. His aura surged, dark, stable, unbreakable. He questioned who would truly lose. Thomas's expression snapped. Amusement turned to fury. He removed his glasses, revealing eyes colder than ice. He insulted Suho openly. Their auras collided. Two storms crashed together. The air cracked, walls vibrated. Dust fell. The building groaned. Thomas leaned closer, teeth clenched. He warned Suho. He was courting death. The Hunter Association Hall trembled, caught between two monsters, and neither was willing to back down. The scene fast-forwarded to the main briefing hall of the Hunter Association. At the center of the room stood Chairman Woo Jin-chul. After a brief pause, Woo Jin-chul spoke. The S-rank raid briefing will now begin. His voice echoed through the chamber. Woo Jin-chul raised his hand toward the massive screen behind him. An image appeared. A colossal S-rank gate floated above Seoul like a dark moon, radiating danger. He continued calmly. This dungeon possesses a unique threat. Any mechanical device that enters the gate will immediately malfunction. Aircraft, drones, emergency escape systems. None of them will function. If anyone loses control mid-air, survival will be impossible. The room grew heavier, but Woo Jin-chul continued. However, we have identified a narrow opportunity. As the dungeon approaches its break, the gate has been descending little by little. Eventually, it will descend to a level where entry is possible without machines. He straightened. Our strategy is as follows. A hunter capable of aerial control will guide an aircraft carrying the raid team. Once inside the gate, special protective equipment will absorb the landing impact. From there, the boss must be eliminated within 24 hours. Afterward, we exit through the lowered gate. Unease spread instantly. Whispers erupted. If getting inside is that dangerous, what kind of monster's waiting in there? One day to kill an S-rank boss. That's suicide. Before Woo Jin-chul could respond, Thomas Undre, the national-level hunter's presence alone seemed to crush the air. Half the hall felt swallowed by his shadow. With calm authority, he spoke. The Scavenger Guild will not join Korea's team. We will clear the gate ourselves. Woo Jin-chul tried to maintain control. For a threat of this level, international cooperation, Thomas interrupted sharply. It was your association that suggested turning this into a competition. You insisted that each team use only what they possess inside the dungeon. His gaze shifted. It stopped at an empty seat near the front row. His eyebrow twitched. Sung Suho isn't here. Did the kid run off? Woo Jinchul froze for a brief moment. Memories flashed in his mind. Yesterday's confrontation, the violent pressure between Suho and Thomas. Letting them meet again would be catastrophic. As expected, he thought grimly. Before Thomas's irritation grew, another figure stepped forward. A white-haired apostle bowed politely. Sung Suho is currently engaged in a raid. Thomas clicked his tongue, still overworking himself. Doesn't even manage his stamina. What a reckless rookie. Then his eyes narrowed at the apostle. And who are you? Park Do-jin answered calmly. My name is Park Do-jin. Recognition flickered across Thomas's face. A faint smirk appeared. Another S-rank awakened around the same time as Suho. At least you know how to show respect. If you ever think about switching sides, come find me. I can offer far better conditions. For the first time, Park Do-jin's composure wavered. I will consider it. His voice carried quiet shock. From the side, Lim Tae-gyu nearly choked. Unbothered, Thomas slipped a hand into his coat. A daring grin formed on his face. With a flick of his wrist, he revealed a shining coin. A simple solution. Heads, Scavenger goes first. Tails, Korea goes first. With a practiced motion, he tossed the coin into the air. It spun upward, glittering beneath the lights. No one spoke. No one dared to. The moment the coin left his fingers, the entire hall fell silent. Woo Jin-chul clenched his jaw. Baek Yoon-ho leaned forward. Choi Jong-in's fist tightened against his knees. One toss would decide who entered the deadliest dungeon humanity had ever faced. The coin flipped, turned, whirled. Among hundreds of tense hunters, only one person remained calm. The apostle. His golden eyes followed the spinning metal. A faint, knowing smile appeared on his lips, as if he already knew the result. The coin reached its peak, paused, then fell. And in that instant, everyone held their breath. Far away, deep within an unexplored dungeon, Arsha walked forward with her arms crossed. She mentioned that she had heard the apostle was also joining the S-rank gate raid. The apostle stared back at her without emotion. There was no curiosity, no irritation, only cold, refined silence. He reminded her that he had already warned her to stop monitoring him through insects. Arsha laughed softly, completely unbothered. She claimed she had not been watching him at all. She explained that she had only been following Sung Suho and that the apostle just happened to be nearby. As her eyes narrowed slightly, she admitted under her breath that Suho had been fighting nonstop. He was pushing himself endlessly, trying to catch up to Thomas Andre. He probably had not even noticed anyone else around him. Shaking off the thought, Arsha turned back with a playful grin. She said that since they would be working together during the raid, they might as well pretend to be friends. After all, fake friendship made betrayal easier. The apostle blinked once. He admitted that he did not understand why anyone would pretend to be close just to betray someone later. Arsha snickered. She remarked that someone with no friends would never understand. His eyes narrowed at the comment, but before he could respond, she changed the subject. She calmly stated that her group would also be entering the gate. He asked what business they had inside the gate. Arsha stepped forward confidently. She revealed that they were the ones who had created the gate. At her words, two shadowy figures appeared behind her, radiating a dangerous intent. For the first time, the apostle showed faint surprise. Something finally cracked in the apostle's composure. He asked in disbelief whether she was saying the S-rank gate had been artificially created. Arsha confirmed it without hesitation. She gently pushed a small girl forward. Pia, dressed in a bunny hoodie, stepped ahead and revealed glowing ethereal horns. Arsha explained that Pia possessed the ability to create gates. However, she could not control their location or stability. That was why the gate had appeared in the sky and begun sinking. Pia waved her arms nervously, protesting that Arsha had revealed too much. The apostle silently absorbed the information. Now he understood. Suddenly he turned toward Pia and asked whether her power could open a path to the other world. The girl froze in terror. Before he could continue, Arsha stepped between them. Her voice turned icy. She made it clear that such a thing was impossible. Even monarch-level beings could not do that. She warned him that if he ever tried to use Pia, she would expose every secret he had been hiding to Sung Suho. The apostle's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Arsha extended her hand with a sly smile and suggested they become partners for the raid. He immediately stepped backward. He refused. He said he had his own mission. Thomas Andre, standing like a giant among hunters. A ruthless thought followed. The chaos of the gate would be the perfect chance to claim a national-level hunter. Arsha watched him leave with amusement. She teased that he had started with Lee Yun-suk and was now aiming for Thomas Andre. She added casually that delaying the raid would benefit her group no matter what happened. The apostle glanced back once. He told her not to interfere. Arsha called after him, asking whether he was curious why they had created the gate. He did not stop. He stated that their alliance was based on necessity, not trust. And if she was avoiding the explanation, it meant he would never accept it. Arsha sighed. He was unbearable. No wonder he had no friends. The apostle walked straight toward the swirling blue entrance. The air warped around him. Without hesitation, he stepped through and vanished in azure light. Pia clutched Arsha's sleeve, trembling. She asked whether working with him was truly safe. She feared that if he succeeded, the other world might invade. She confessed that holding the gate was destroying her body. The system was not helping. She was terrified. Arsha slowly turned. Her voice softened. She spoke Pia's name gently. Then her expression darkened. Cold light burned in her eyes. Her tone became chilling. She questioned why Pia would doubt the system that had brought them this far. That doubt, she said, made her troublesome. She reminded Pia that she had followed every command perfectly, enough to create an S-rank gate that even monarchs feared. Arsha leaned close. She told her firmly that her growth was not her own. It was the system's blessing. The system existed to refine them into flawless monarchs. Without warning, Arsha pulled Pia into a tight embrace. It looked comforting, but her voice remained commanding. She ordered her never to question the system again. Then her tone softened artificially. She reminded Pia that the system had guided her rescue. Without it, she would have been lost forever. She promised ascension, perfect bodies, perfect forms, perfect monarchs. Overwhelmed, Pia broke down. She sobbed and apologized repeatedly. She promised never to doubt again. Arsha nodded in satisfaction. Obedience suited her. Behind them, a hidden figure watched in silent disapproval. A frost-blue system window appeared. Smiling confidently, she welcomed their next mission. The quest expanded. Locate and recruit the Heir of Frost within the S-rank gate. The scene shifted to a restricted zone. Hunters assembled in precise formations while emergency preparations reached their peak. Then, a massive aircraft slammed onto the runway. Its engines roared like wild beasts. Through the chaos walked Thomas Andre, with Laura following closely behind. Surveying the area, he remarked that the raid was so massive they even needed B-rank hunters for excavation. To him, it was nothing but a grand spectacle. Laura maintained her professional composure. He commented that an unprecedented S-rank gate had appeared and asked if she understood what that meant. She responded flatly that, to him, nothing mattered except wealth and power. He agreed completely. Then he added that he would sprinkle in a little romance. Gesturing toward the violent vortex swirling in the sky, he declared that moments like this demanded heroes. Places like this, he claimed, were where legends were born. Laura lightly nudged him and asked whether he was trying to play the hero now. Thomas shrugged casually. If the reward was large enough, he said, he could play any role. His laughter suddenly stopped. A familiar figure had entered the airfield. Sung Suho. He walked through the crowd with a presence that made the noise fade around him. Even the air seemed to recognize his arrival. For the briefest moment, Thomas's confident grin faltered. He greeted Suho with exaggerated amusement. He announced that this time, the Scavenger Guild would enter first. The gap between them, he claimed, was about to grow even wider. Then he asked Suho what his plan was. Suho did not react. He did not flinch. He did not rise to the provocation. He only tilted his head slightly, studying Thomas with calm, unreadable eyes. Then he lifted one hand lazily. He stated that he would simply consider it Thomas's handicap. The words were simple, yet sharper than any insult. Thomas narrowed his eyes as Suho walked away. He quietly asked Laura if they had not met Suho only 3 days earlier. She confirmed it. His frown deepened. He wondered aloud why Suho felt so different now. That aura. It was as if something inhuman was wearing a human shell. Before he could think further, the gate erupted. Blinding light burst outward. The vortex roared open like a cosmic mouth. Suho looked up, sensing the overwhelming power radiating from the gate. He realized that an S-rank gate existed on an entirely different level. Cho Jong-in stepped beside him. Lim Tai-ju, Baek Yun-ho, Ma Dong-wook, and other top hunters formed ranks behind them. Cho asked why Suho looked so serious. Everything had gone smoothly. He teased that Suho was not worried about losing to the scavenger guild, was he? Suho replied calmly. He stated that he did not lose. Thomas grinned widely, delighted by the confidence. Nearby, Park Do-jin, the apostle, suddenly stiffened. He sensed something strange. A tiny insect landed silently behind Suho. Arsha's familiar, hidden, watching. Engines thundered. The first transport plane surged into the sky toward the gate. Snow and debris exploded across the runway. 2 more aircraft followed, cutting through the frozen clouds. And with their ascent, the S-rank raid began. Inside the S-rank gate, devastation stretched in every direction. Flaming wreckage littered a frozen wasteland. A shattered transport aircraft lay skewered across the snow, torn apart by impact. Smoke spiraled into the gray sky. Fire crawled across broken debris. At the center of the chaos, Sung Suho stood alone. Snow drifted around him as he surveyed the destruction. He released a slow breath. How did it end like this? Before entering the gate, the transport plane had fought violently through a raging blizzard. Inside the cabin, tension was suffocating. Suho sat with his elbows resting on his knees. His gaze remained fixed on the floor. Park calmly observed that Suho looked unusually tense. Suho exhaled and replied that he was simply thinking. After a brief pause, he admitted it was mostly about the scavenger guild entering first again. The memory burned. Thomas Andre's smug grin. That careless coin toss. A decision made without him. Irritation surged. He forced it down. Park reminded him evenly that worrying would not change the order. They arrived first. That was all. Suho agreed outwardly. An S-rank gate benefited the entire world. But inwardly, he wanted to crush their pride, especially Thomas Andre's. Across the aisle, Baek Yun-ho leaned forward with confidence. He pointed out that the scavenger guild had brought mining teams. Meanwhile, Suho's shadows could strip a dungeon bare in moments. They already had the advantage. Park's gaze lingered on Suho. Something unreadable flickered. He sensed it clearly now. Suho's mana had grown. Not gradually, explosively, denser, sharper, hungry. Then he noticed Ma Dong-wook and Lim Tae-gyu. Their auras had also changed, strengthened by shadow-forged equipment, like living markings etched into their bodies. The conclusion formed quietly. It all traced back to Suho. Suho suddenly turned toward him. He mentioned casually that he had not given Park any equipment yet. Shadows curled from his palm. Dark mana condensed, twisted, solidified. A weapon formed, forged from living darkness. Magic hummed through the cabin. Park instinctively tensed. Suho offered the item as thanks for past help. Park studied it carefully. He asked if it tracked him. Suho immediately denied it. Completely, unequivocally. If Park was uncomfortable, he said, he could refuse. Park hesitated. Arsha's voice echoed in his mind. Get close. Earn his trust. Then destroy it. Her mocking laughter followed. You don't even have friends. After a long pause, Park accepted the weapon. He said quietly that he would use it, if Suho was honest. Relief softened Suho's posture. He said they would finish this raid together. Suddenly, the aircraft lurched violently. Choi Jong-in's voice cut through the chaos. He ordered everyone to brace. They were entering the gate. The world outside dissolved into swirling blue light. Then, they burst through. A frozen realm awaited. Endless white plains, jagged ice cliffs, howling storms. Wind battered the hull like a living beast. Hunters pressed to the windows in awe and fear. Then the engine sputtered. Once, twice, and died. The aircraft began to sink. Choi adjusted his glasses calmly. He explained that flight inside the gate was impossible. They were to move to descent capsules. Then he addressed them firmly. Clear the dungeon. No retreat. No hesitation. They were humanity's first shield. The hunters answered in unison. Fear hardened into resolve. Park watched them. Something cold tightened in his chest. This team wasn't just assembled to fight monsters. They were meant to oppose apostles. To oppose him. A faint golden spark shimmered across his shoulder. His power awakened. Silently, he directed it toward Lee. Lightning gathered in Lee's arm. Unseen. Deadly. Park's thoughts were clear. No one would interfere. Lee slammed his hand into the floor. Golden electricity exploded. Metal screamed. The aircraft shook violently. Suho sensed the distortion instantly. He snapped toward the source. Alarm flashed in his eyes. Before anyone could react, the sky ignited. A blinding eruption tore the aircraft apart. Fire and metal scattered across the storm. Flames spiraled like molten petals. The transport vanished in a storm of destruction. Below, the Scavenger Guild's advance team stopped. They stared upward in disbelief. One hunter shouted that the Korean team's aircraft had exploded. Thomas Andre glanced at the fireball. He shrugged. He called it a dramatic entrance. A subordinate asked if they should help. Thomas dismissed it coldly. S-rank hunters do not die so easily. He turned toward the distant glacier peaks. Monstrous shadows lurked among them. Enough watching, he ordered. The raid begins. His guild moved out. Their footsteps disappeared into the storm. Meanwhile, slowly, Sung Suho opened his eyes. Cold stabbed into his skin. Snow pressed against his back as freezing wind tore through his clothes. Burning fragments from the destroyed aircraft continued to fall across the tundra, scattered like shattered stars. Moments ago, he had been inside the transport. Now, everything was gone. With effort, Suho pushed himself up. Ice slid from his shoulders as he rose to one knee. Around him, the wreckage told the story clearly. The explosion had scattered everyone. They had been thrown in every direction. Suho's heart tightened. He quickly checked his equipment. The shadow item bound to his body still pulsed with steady energy. It was working. If his artifact survived, then the others had a chance too. That meant they were alive. That was enough. His shoulders relaxed slightly. He planted his hand into the frozen ground. Shadow soldiers emerged from shallow graves of ice and dirt. Their towering forms shimmered with black flame. Empty eyes burned with loyalty as they formed a silent circle around their master. They were ready. For a brief moment, Suho considered regrouping, calling everyone back, and rebuilding formation. But he rejected the idea immediately. The Scavenger Guild had already advanced. Every second he wasted increased the distance. Chairman Choi Jong-in and the veteran hunters were more than capable of gathering the survivors. They didn't need him. Right now, the front line needed pressure. He tightened his grip around greed. Cold resolve hardened in his eyes. He would push forward alone. With a sudden burst, Suho launched himself ahead. Snow exploded beneath his feet. Each step cracked the frozen earth. Wind screamed past him as his speed increased. The endless white plain blurred. Then, he saw it. Far in the distance, a colossal mountain rose from the horizon. Jagged, towering. That was it. The core. The final battlefield. The dungeon's heart. Without hesitation, Suho accelerated. But suddenly, the ground exploded. Ice shattered violently beneath his feet. A thunderous impact rippled through the tundra as Suho skidded backward. Before the snow could settle, massive shapes burst from underground. Monsters climbed out of fractured ice. Their skin was coated in frost. Their eyes burned red. Hot breath poured from their mouths like smoke from a furnace. Ice beasts, massive, starving, waiting. Suho narrowed his gaze. They weren't random. They were ambushers. They had been hiding beneath the surface. At the same time, greed ignited beside him. Violet energy swirled violently, pulsing like a living flame. Suho stepped forward. His palms slammed into its skull. A violent shockwave erupted. Purple destruction detonated outward like a collapsing star. The monster's head disintegrated instantly, exploding into frost and shattered bone. Suho didn't stop. His body moved on instinct. Cold adrenaline flooded his veins. The real raid had begun. With a sharp breath, Sung Suho threw himself into the charging horde, and the frozen battlefield erupted. The scene shifted deep into the frozen wasteland. An ancient temple stood buried beneath layers of ice and snow. Massive stone pillars rose toward the ceiling, cracked and half consumed by frost. Every breath inside the chamber burned with unbearable cold. At the center of the hall towered a colossal statue. It was the image of the Frost Monarch. Its carved face showed neither anger nor mercy, only distant authority. At the statue's feet, a small frost elf knelt in prayer. Her translucent hands were clasped tightly together. They trembled as she whispered into the frozen silence. She wondered what would happen next. She knew that one day Cha-Cha would leave the village. When that happened, she would become the oldest among the remaining children. Her pale blue eyes lowered, clouded with worry. That meant everyone would depend on her. Her voice shook like fragile ice. She feared she was not strong enough. Memories stirred in her heart, painful memories she wished she could forget. Not long ago, the village had awakened to absolute silence. Not peaceful silence, but empty silence. The adults had vanished overnight. Only frightened children remained, wandering through snow-filled streets, calling for parents who would never return. Back then, even the cold had felt heavier, as if winter itself was grieving with them. Then, a miracle had arrived. A deep, ancient roar had torn across the sky. A gigantic wyvern descended through swirling snow and wind, its wings creating raging blizzards as it landed. Standing upon its back was the figure they would later call Cha-Cha. The Frost Elf remembered that moment clearly. The fear, the awe, the impossible hope. From that day forward, everything changed. Cha-Cha taught them which storms were safe, which paths meant death. She taught them how to hunt beneath hardened snow, how to build shelters from frozen remains, how to survive in a world where winter never ended. Under her guidance, the village learned how to live again. Yet every time Cha-Cha spoke about her distant homeland, fear crept into the Frost Elf's heart. She worried that one day, just like the adults, Cha-Cha would disappear too, and they would be alone again. Leaving her prayer behind, the Frost Elf quietly walked out of the temple. She wrapped her arms around herself. If Cha-Cha leaves, everything will fall on me. Before the thought could settle, the world roared. A monstrous sound rolled across the plains. The ice beneath her feet trembled. She looked up in alarm. The ground exploded. Steam and frost erupted from the impact. Rose an ice mountain giant, towering, raging. The Frost Elf stumbled back, heart pounding. Giants never came this far south. Something terrible had driven it here. The giant charged. Its massive arm crashed down like a falling glacier. She barely dodged. The ground burst where she had stood. Ice fragments tore through the air. Rolling across the snow, she sprang back up and drew her twin blades. Despite her size, fierce resolve burned in her chest. She rushed forward. She swore to protect the village, even if it cost her life. But her attack never landed. From the side, a massive shadow slammed into the giant. A dark figure shaped like an ice giant, yet corrupted by shadow, collided with it. The Frost Elf froze. A shadow giant. It shouldn't exist. She stared in disbelief. More shadow giants emerged. They moved with discipline, with strategy. They restrained the monster with terrifying efficiency. Not far away, a lone figure observed the battlefield. Sung Suho eyes tracked the fleeing giant carefully. He recognized its pattern. He knew it always ran when danger appeared. If he wanted to stop it, he would have to predict its movement. The Frost Elf suddenly understood. This man had driven the giants away. He was the reason chaos had reached their lands. Raising her blades, she rushed forward to confront him. But Suho stepped into her path. Calm, unmoving. A storm of shadows burned behind his gaze. The cliff behind him trembled as frost fell. She kicked. He caught her leg effortlessly. Shadow energy rippled around him. His eyes locked onto hers. He questioned whether she was another monster. The force sent her flying. She skidded across carving a trail through the snow. Barely stopping herself, she dug her heel into the ice. From behind Suho, the shadow giant rose. He stepped down from its shoulder without a sound. The battlefield seemed to adjust around him. His attention focused on her. He analyzed her stance, her trembling grip, her stubborn resolve. She was only a child, yet she had faced a giant alone. Her name was Sheikah. She raised her blade again. Suho remarked that he hadn't expected a child to fight in such a place. Before he could finish, Shika attacked. She vanished in a blur. Her strike was precise, deadly. Suho didn't turn. Her blade cut empty air. She flew past him, eyes wide. She hadn't missed. She had been ignored. He glanced back. His gaze radiated quiet menace. He called her troublesome. Then, pressure collapsed. Invisible force crushed her into the ground. Suho stepped forward. One step. He stood over her. His aura descended like a mountain. Breathing became torture. Movement became impossible. Calmly, he told her he had no intention of killing her. If she stopped resisting, he would let her go. If she could still speak. For a brief moment, Sung Suho stopped moving. Beneath him, Sheikah's body trembled uncontrollably. Tears streamed from her eyes, freezing against her lashes as she struggled to speak. She begged for her life. Her forehead pressed into the snow as panic spilled from her in broken fragments. She apologized. She admitted she never should have attacked him. She explained that there were people waiting for her, a place she had to return to. Her voice cracked as she repeated the words again and again, clinging to them as if they were the only thing keeping her conscious. One after another, Suho's soldiers emerged. 4 massive Shadow Frost giants rose in silence, forming a towering ring around her. Their presence swallowed the landscape. From Suho's shadow, Baru stepped forward. His aura pressed down sharply. He commented on how overwhelming Suho's presence had become, noting that even adults would tremble under it. And yet the one before him was only a child. Suho shot him an annoyed glance and cut him off. Without wasting time, Suho summoned his system interface. Soft light reflected in his eyes as he navigated through it. He opened the system shop. Before making any decision, he wanted confirmation. He stepped closer and placed his hand gently on Shika's head. The touch was firm, but not cruel. Slowly, the violent shaking in her body eased. She lifted her face. Her eyes were filled with tears, fear, and fragile hope. Suho lowered himself until they were at eye level. Then from inside his coat, he took out a chocolate bar. He held it out to her. His expression was unexpectedly gentle. He told her to eat and suggested she stop crying afterward. She hesitated, then carefully accepted it. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. The cold made every movement slow. She took a small bite. The sweetness spread across her tongue. For the first time, tension loosened from her face. Suho observed her quietly. Then he began to explain. He identified her as an ice elf native to the dungeon. He reasoned that she had attacked him because she believed he threatened her homeland. Shika nodded rapidly, cheeks puffed with chocolate. Though tears still clung to her lashes, her panic had faded. Suho sat down beside her in the snow. He asked her name. Lowering her gaze, she answered softly, Shika. He nodded, then introduced himself. Sung Suho eyes widened. She repeated it excitedly, stumbling over the pronunciation. Suho corrected her patiently. He spoke his name slowly, again and again, until she followed. Even then, she still got it slightly wrong, but she smiled brightly. Suho stared at her for a moment, considering whether correcting her further was worth the effort. Leaning against an icy wall, he explained that he was a hunter. He had entered the dungeon to clear it. He mentioned that he had companions, but they had been scattered after the crash. Shika tilted her head. She asked what a hunter was. He explained that hunters fought monsters, that they existed to protect others. Her reaction was immediate. She straightened proudly. Her eyes sparkled. She declared that she was the same, a strong ice elf hunter. She introduced herself again with confidence. She said she fought to protect her family and village. Suho looked genuinely impressed. He asked if she really protected everyone. She explained that she was the oldest in the village. Whenever danger came and Cha was absent, she stood in front. At that name, Suho's expression shifted. A quiet suspicion formed. He wondered if Cha might be the dungeon boss. Shika raised her hand toward the pale sky. She spoke Cha's name softly. She explained how, when all the adults vanished, Cha had fallen from the sky, how Cha had protected them when no one else could. Suddenly, Shika grabbed Suho's sleeve. Her eyes shone. She spoke rapidly. She said Cha was warm, had black wings, and smelled nice. Suho looked away. Warm, black wings, smelled nice. A familiar image surfaced in his mind, a small lion-like shadow creature. The resemblance unsettled him. He stood slowly. Brushing frost from his clothes, he spoke with certainty. Cha was not the boss. Turning back to Sheikah, he told her he needed to continue. It had been good meeting her. He turned to leave. She called out. Stepping forward, she clenched her fists. She said he could pull delicious food from nowhere. If he stayed, her village would never worry again. Suho paused, surprised by her sincerity. He gave her a small apologetic smile. He explained that he was busy. He had to go. Her expression tightened. She asked if there was truly no way. He shook his head. No. As he turned away, metal hissed. Sheikah drew her dagger. She stepped forward, holding it tightly. She said she had no choice. Suho stopped. He turned back. She lowered her stance. Her body braced against the wind. Quietly, she apologized, calling him Ho-Ho. Her voice trembled, then steadied. She said that for her sibling's sake, she could betray even him. If she could take his power back, her family would never starve. Silence followed. The words hung in frozen air. Suho watched her quietly. Then he moved. The strike was too fast to see. A sharp snap cracked through the air. Her dagger shattered. The broken halves trembled in her hands. Her resolve collapsed with it. Suho spoke calmly. He acknowledged her desperation, that she fought not for herself, but for others. Shadows surged up his arm. Dark smoke condensed into a jagged gauntlet. When he clenched his fist, the air groaned. Reality itself seemed to recoil. He looked at her. He told her he was desperate too. Violet light ignited in his eyes. Shadowed mana spread across the snow. His voice dropped. If anyone stood in his way, he would not show mercy, no matter who they were. The pressure intensified. Sheikah flinched. He warned her plainly. If she wished to stop him, she must be prepared. Without another word, he reached into his inventory. Boxes appeared, again. Cartons of chocolate piled into a small mountain. When finished, he told her to take them, and let him pass. Sheikah stood frozen. She whispered in disbelief. Suho had already turned away. He walked into the white expanse. Without looking back, he apologized. Someone precious to him was in danger. He could not stay. They would meet again. As he walked, guilt tugged at him. Leaving a child alone troubled him. He summoned a shadow soldier, preparing to protect her secretly. Before he acted, she called out. She asked why he had spared her. He stopped. He answered honestly. Killing her would not have felt right. She was someone who protected others, even while standing alone. He apologized again, then vanished. Sheikah remained trembling. Unseen, a shadow lingered nearby, watching, protecting. Time passed. She loaded the chocolate onto a wooden sled. The boards groaned. She tied everything down. In the forest, she began pulling. Deep tracks formed behind her. Her body ached, but she did not stop. She thought of Suho. He had spared her. Twice. He had shared his food. Guilt and gratitude twisted inside her. Eventually, she stopped. Looking at her gloved hand, she whispered that he was warm-hearted, like Cha. Then footsteps sounded, slow, measured. She turned. Strangers emerged. At their center stood Arsha. Arsha smiled casually. She explained they were searching for something. She asked if Sheikah knew anything. Hope flared. She asked if they were Suho's comrades. Arsha denied it, then revealed their true goal. They sought the inheritance of the Frost Monarch. Sheikah hesitated. She asked if that meant her grandfather. Arsha realized the truth. She smiled. Sheikah was the successor. She called her a future monarch. She explained they were heirs too, destined beings, then asked the question, would Sheikah join them? Fear surged. She turned away. She said she had to return home. Behind her, Arsha's smile twisted. Dark energy exploded. The ground shattered. The sled was destroyed. Chocolate scattered. Chains bound Sheikah. Arsha approached calmly. They only needed a frost descendant. Persuasion was unnecessary. She raised a glowing green fragment. Red light burned in her eyes. She commanded Sheikah to submit. Meanwhile, Choi Jong-in's fingers tightened instinctively. In response, scorching heat surged from his palm. Flames spiraled upward, wrapping around his arm as raw power flooded his body. At the same time, a translucent system window appeared. It confirmed the shadow bracelet now secured around his wrist. It displayed an equipped item. Torch, shadow bracelet, heroic grade. The heat grew suffocating. It was so dense that it felt as though his blood itself was beginning to boil. Choi did not hesitate. He thrust his hand forward. Fire detonated. A violent inferno erupted from his palm, swallowing his arm completely. The explosion surged across the battlefield. A blazing corridor was carved through the frozen terrain. The opening was immediate. Ma Dong-wook and Park Do-jin charged forward together. They sprinted straight through the wall of fire, weapons raised. The flames parted. Beyond them stood towering ice giants. Their colossal bodies were sculpted from hardened frost and frozen stone. Each step they took shook the ground. The inferno crashed into them head-on. Roars of agony thundered across the field. Their bodies cracked. Ice melted. Steam screamed into the air. The giants staggered backward, unable to endure the heat. Amid the chaos, Ma snapped his head toward Choi. Awe burned in his eyes. He shouted over the roar of flames, half laughing as he praised Choi as their ultimate weapon. He joked that their presence almost seemed unnecessary, but before the flames fully faded, from behind an ice monster lunged toward Ma. Its massive claws ripped through the smoke. Killing intent crashed down like a wave. Ma felt it instantly. He turned slowly. A feral grin spread across his face. A system window flickered before him. It displayed his shadow equipment item. Demon Emperor. Armor. Heroic. Ma rolled his shoulders. He cracked his knuckles. His feet planted firmly in the snow. He welcomed the charge. He shouted that something like this was nothing. When he swung, violet energy erupted from his shield. The impact was catastrophic. In Asir, before the echoes faded, Park Do-jin descended from above. His massive form fell like a meteor. Momentum and shadow converged into a single crushing blow. As he dropped, another system window appeared. Shadow item. Gabbet, heroic, armor. Shadow reinforcement, 21%. The instant his boot struck the ground, Park's expression hardened. White energy surged along his arm. It coated his fist in blinding light. Just before impact, another system message flashed. Active skill. Forms an iron-hard defensive coating. Greatly boosts defense prior to activation. Park drove his glowing fist forward. The punch drilled through the ice giant. It obliterated the monster from the inside. Park straightened slowly. Disbelief flickered across his face. He murmured that he could actually fight at this level. Even in an S-rank dungeon. Ma stepped beside him. He clapped a hand on Park's shoulder. A confident grin spread across his face. He said this was what happened when they used Suho's weapons and stacked every possible buff. Pride colored his voice. Then his gaze shifted toward the distance. Through drifting snow, two figures emerged. Ma narrowed his eyes. He remarked that things on their side seemed finished as well. Park followed his gaze. Baek Yoon-ho stepped forward. A broad grin spread across his face. He clenched his fists. Black aura flared violently around him. Power rolled off his body in heavy waves. Nearby, Sung Ki-hoon stood stiffly. His expression was blank. Due to timing, he had not received any shadow equipment. Baek adjusted his stance. He glanced toward Choi Jong-in and the others. Surveying the battlefield, he spoke evenly. The scavenger guild had moved faster than expected. Choi adjusted his glasses calmly. They should move as well. Park Jang-soo crossed his arms. He noted that thanks to the strongest hunter's final decision, they had assembled quickly. Still, Baek turned toward Choi and asked what they should do about the remaining hunters. Choi answered without hesitation. There was no need for concern. An image surfaced in his mind. Sung Suho advancing alone. Hunter Sung Suho had noticed the scavenger guild's movements, yet he still chose to go ahead by himself. Choi briefly considered Lim Tae-gyu and Park Do-jin, then continued. The scavenger guild operated independently. There was a strong chance they were already split up. He looked forward again. His eyes sharpened. Either way, everyone was heading to the same destination. If they continued, they would eventually cross paths. Their opponent included a national-level hunter, Thomas Andre. At that name, every S-rank hunter turned in unison. Their expressions hardened. They would show their strength. The camera shifted forward. Far ahead, Thomas Andre advanced through the frozen valley. His massive frame moved like a living fortress. Muscles coiled beneath his long coat. High above them, hidden within a jagged crack along an icy cliff, two figures remained perfectly still. Park Do-jin and Lee Min-sung pressed themselves flat against the frozen rock. Shadows clung tightly to their bodies. Their presence blended seamlessly with the surrounding ice. Below, Thomas Andre and his guild passed without noticing. Cold air escaped from Park's lips in a thin white stream. His eyes narrowed, his focus sharpened. There he is. His gaze locked onto the towering figure below. It did not waver. That man was a national-level hunter. Thomas Andre. Thoughts raced through his mind. If someone like that were brought onto their side, if a hunter of that caliber joined them, they could start a war powerful enough to shake the world. Images of humanity's strongest warriors flashed through his thoughts. The implications were overwhelming. Pressure settled heavily in his chest. Park released a slow breath. His fingers tightened. Energy began to crackle between them. Violent, compressed, disciplined. Power spiraled tightly around his palm. He compressed it carefully. A blazing weapon formed in his hands. A luminous bow of condensed energy. Park steadied his stance. His eyes became razor-sharp. He prepared to fire. Below, Thomas Andre continued walking, unaware, unconcerned, as if nothing in the world could threaten him. Park's fingers tightened. Then, a calm voice cut through the tension. It came from behind him, clear, steady, unshaken. Even if this is a competition, attacking another guild is unacceptable. The words carried weight. Park's eyes widened. His grip loosened. The glowing energy faltered. It scattered into the air like fading sparks. The bow dissolved. Slowly, Park lowered his arms. Snow shifted beneath his boots as he turned. Lim Tai-gyu stood behind him. As the guild master, his presence was commanding. His voice was quiet, but absolute. He said he would not tolerate behavior like that. Without softening his gaze, he demanded to know what Park thought he was doing, acting without a plan. Park stiffened. He answered quickly. His voice was tense. He claimed they had spotted the scavenger guild by coincidence. From a high vantage point, they had simply approached first, hoping to claim the reward. Lim's eyes narrowed instantly. That is a lie. Lim stepped forward. His presence grew heavier. His voice turned cold. He said he had been observing Park's movements since they landed. Without pausing, he continued. He asked if Park had also lied about encountering the scavenger guild by chance. Park Do-jin and Lee Min-sung remained silent. Lim's gaze sharpened further. He spoke slowly. He referenced the explosion that destroyed their aircraft. Then he paused. That explosion was caused by an ability-type hunter, wasn't it? Silence answered him. Park finally turned fully toward Lim. His eyes narrowed. A sharp golden glint flashed within them. His voice dropped. He asked whether Lim had already realized their plan. Then he admitted the truth. Of course you did. Someone like you wouldn't miss it. A faint breath escaped him. He acknowledged the difference. That was the instinct of a ranger, sharper than anyone else. His tone hardened. He continued. The same applied to Lee Min-sung. If the two of you had remained silent, everything would have gone smoothly. Lim Tai-gyu's eyes widened. Shock crossed his face. He demanded to know what Park meant. In response, Park raised an object in his hand, a star fragment. Its golden light reflected brilliantly across the snow. At his side, Lee's aura erupted. Blue lightning snapped around his body. His power surged violently. Park spoke calmly. Lim was not a national-level hunter. That was unfortunate. But he was still S rank. In the next instant, Lim raised his bow. He prepared to fire, but he never released. A sharp crack split the air. In a blink, he reappeared behind Lim. His blade was already drawn. Its edge hovered dangerously close. The ambush had begun. The scene returned to the frozen forest. Snow drifted silently through the air. Between shattered trees and frozen ground, Arsha raised a glowing green fragment. Nearby, Shika hung helplessly. Her body was tightly bound within the coiled form of Arsha's massive centipede summon. The creature's segmented body wrapped around her like living chains. She could barely move. At Arsha's command, one of the centipedes slid forward. Its armored segments scraped softly against the frozen ground. It approached her obediently. She stated that if the fragment was implanted into Sheikah's body, there would be no need for further conversation. The faintly glowing crystal was passed into the waiting pincers of the summon. Behind her, Pia stood with her arms crossed. She watched without emotion. She mocked Sheikah, saying she should have obeyed from the beginning, calling her foolish. Inside the creature's grip, Sheikah trembled. Her breathing became uneven. Each breath burned her lungs in the freezing air. Fear swirled violently in her eyes. Nothing they said made sense. Her thoughts drifted back to the village, to the younger elves waiting for her. She only wanted to protect them. She begged silently for help. Another memory surfaced, blurred, painful, her grandfather's face. Then reality returned. The centipede's massive shadow swallowed her. The creature raised the glowing fragment. It moved closer, closer to her face. Sheikah's breath caught. She squeezed her eyes shut. She did not want this. Then, darkness erupted. From beneath her shadow, a colossal black hand burst upward. It was formed entirely from condensed darkness. Overwhelming power surged through it. The hand seized the centipede mid-motion. There was no resistance, no struggle. The summon was crushed instantly. Arsha stumbled backward. For the first time, her composure cracked. Her words failed her. From Sheikah's shadow, something massive rose. A shadow-infused ice giant emerged into full view. Dark energy dripped from its enormous form. One hand still clutched the remains of the destroyed summon. It positioned itself behind Sheikah, protective, dominant, towering. Sheikah stared up in disbelief. Her voice trembled as realization struck. A summoned beast. Ho-Ho's power. Arsha's eyes narrowed. The truth settled in. She realized Sheikah had already come into contact with shadow energy. Pia gasped. Panic flashed across her face. She cried out that the heir of shadow would come, that Suho would arrive. Arsha glanced at the shattered fragments scattered across the snow. Her jaw tightened. Her voice became sharp and controlled. There were no spare star fragments, and she had no intention of facing Suho while still bound to Itarim. Her aura erupted. Twisted shadows coiled violently around her body. Red light ignited in her eyes. She declared their retreat. They would take the air of frost and leave. She ordered Granga to handle the situation. The ground trembled. The vibration passed through Sheikah's body. Fear froze her for a heartbeat. Then she clenched her teeth. She forced her shaking hands to steady. She would not freeze anymore. Anger burned beneath the fear. They had threatened her people first. She would not run again. With that resolve, Sheikah lunged. Her dagger was clenched tightly. Snow sprayed beneath her feet. She charged straight at Arsha. Before she could reach her, Granga appeared, like an iron wall. His presence slammed into her, crushing, overwhelming. His weapon swung instantly. The blunt end struck her stomach. The air was ripped from her lungs. Pain folded her body inward. At that moment, a thunderous roar shook the storm. The shadow ice giant surged forward. Dark energy spiraled around its massive fist. It charged Granga. Granga did not hesitate. His weapon flashed, one clean strike. It cleaved straight through the giant. The shadow construct ruptured, collapsed, and dissolved into drifting black mist. Granga remained unmoved. With his free hand, he seized Sheikah by the face. He lifted her effortlessly. His grip tangled in her hair. Pain shot through her scalp, but her eyes remained fixed on Arsha. She was too strong. Fear and frustration tightened her chest. Arsha stepped closer. Her expression was eerily calm. She ordered Sheikah not to move, warned her not to make things worse. Then, the air screamed. A dark blur shot down from the cliff. It cut through the storm at terrifying speed. Its shadow stretched across the snow. Arsha's eyes widened. She recognized it. Granga moved instantly. He stepped forward, raised his weapon. Power surged through its blade. Suho stood there. Cold fury burned in his eyes. He lifted his head, demanded to know who they were and where they were taking the child. Sheikah's head snapped up. Her voice broke. She cried out his name. Relief overwhelmed her. Tears spilled freely. Granga shifted. Suho moved. His fist launched forward. Like a falling star, it slammed into Granga's weapon. The impact detonated. A violent shockwave erupted. Ice and debris filled the air. The mountainside trembled. A storm was born from the collision. Granga's eyes widened. The force exceeded everything he expected. His weapon screamed, cracked, vibrated violently. His grip weakened. That moment was enough. Arsha acted. She grabbed Sheikah's arm, dragged her away at full speed. Pia followed. They fled across the frozen ground. Pia shouted in panic, asking what they should do. Arsha ordered her to prepare the gate. Immediately, space warped ahead. A teleportation gate began to form. Arsha tightened her grip. Suho's growth was abnormal. His power defied logic, but as long as Granga delayed him, escape was possible. Then, a voice thundered behind them, heavy enough to crush bone. Suho demanded to know where they thought they were going. Granga was already on his knees. His weapon lay shattered. His massive body trembled. Suho's aura pinned him to the ground. He could not rise. The warrior who had dominated moments earlier was finished. Sheikah lifted her head. Her body still trembled, but seeing Suho shattered her fear. Relief flooded her. Tears froze against her skin. Suho advanced again. Darkness surged. A shadow gauntlet formed around his arm. His glowing eyes locked onto Arsha. He demanded that she release the child. Suho advanced slowly. Dark energy wrapped around his arm. The shadow gauntlet pulsed with a deep, ominous hum, responding to his rising intent. The frozen battlefield seemed to tremble. His voice cut through the storm. Low, steady, absolute. He ordered them to release the child. Nearby, Pia stiffened. Her gaze flicked toward Granga. Annoyance flashed across her face. Arsha clicked her tongue in irritation. Her expression darkened as she studied the situation. Control was slipping, and she could feel it. In her grasp, Sheikah trembled violently. Tears filled her eyes. Arsha reacted instantly. Without hesitation, she ordered her not to move. Before Sheikah could even react, one of Arsha's insects struck. Pain flared briefly, then vanished. Her strength drained away. Her limbs went limp. Her vision blurred. From behind them, Suho's voice rang out in shock. He called her name. Arsha turned slightly. A faint, knowing smile formed on her lips. She calmly explained that the girl had merely been put to sleep. The words hit Suho like a blow. Understanding struck. His eyes widened. Slowly, disbelief filled his expression. He realized what Sheikah truly was. A descendant of the Frost Monarch. A survivor of the ancient war. Arsha met his stare without flinching. She confirmed it. Not only were they survivors, they were chosen heirs. Descendants who had inherited the will of fallen monarchs. Suho inhaled sharply. Before he could process it, power exploded. Granga let out a low, feral growl. He forced himself upright. Veins bulged along his arms. Energy flooded back into his massive frame. He lifted his weapon without hesitation. The blade tore through the frozen air. A savage strike crashed towards Suho. Suho barely blocked in time. The impact launched him backward. His body skidded across the snow. He clenched his teeth. Shock burned in his eyes. Both arms should have shattered. There was no time to recover. Arsha joined the battle. Grotesque, red-eyed insects burst forth at her command. They surged forward in a violent wave. A massive shock wave followed. Snow, ice, and debris were hurled skyward. When the chaos settled, both enemies still stood. Arsha stepped forward. She declared that she would fight as well. They needed to stall Suho, until Pia finished opening the gate. At that moment, a system window appeared before Suho. A quest update, then another. The system identified multiple monarch descendants, some known, others unknown. It warned that Suho lacked sufficient authority. He needed to survive. He needed to prove himself. Only then could he recruit them. Moments later, the frozen wall behind him collapsed. This meant he had to confront the remaining descendants here. A dangerous smile spread across his face. From his shadow, Baru emerged. Excitement radiated from him. He announced that they had already located 3 targets. Suho remained calm. He questioned whether they would cooperate willingly. Haru answered confidently. If they refused, they would be forced. Granga roared. He charged again. His weapon split the air. Suho met him head-on. His movements became ruthless, precise, deadly. In rapid succession, his blade carved through Granga's body. Blood sprayed across the snow. Behind them, Arsha transformed. Dark, centipede-like limbs burst from her back. They twisted violently, living weapons hungry for blood. With one gesture, she commanded them forward. The swarm attacked. Suho pushed through without slowing. Shadows shredded the creatures. As he advanced, he analyzed her fighting style. Insects. Long-range control. A ranged specialist. Arsha only smiled. Then space distorted. Multiple portals snapped open. The insects vanished, then reappeared at Suho's blind spots. They struck from every direction. Suho crossed his arms, braced himself. The impact rattled his body. One attack slipped through. Pain surged. He clenched his teeth. Arsha praised Pia. Pia laughed softly. Suho understood. That was her ability. Spatial support. Before he could adapt, pressure surged again. Granga stood up once more, refusing to fall. His aura rebuilt through sheer will. Suho was surrounded, blocked from every side. A single thought echoed in his mind. Saving Sheikah would not be easy. Then, a voice reached him. Young monarch. Suho froze. Recognition struck. Essel! There was no time to hesitate. He kept fighting. Her voice returned. She urged him to release her and Gray. They would help. Suho resisted. They were not strong enough. But Essel insisted. They wanted to fight beside him, as companions. Granga's weight pressed harder. In that instant, Suho activated the shadow key. Darkness tore open space. Without looking back, he warned them not to push themselves. Essel and Gray emerged. They charged forward instantly, slipping past Granga, heading straight for Arsha. Granga realized too late. They had bypassed him. Essel grinned. Their moment had come. Arsha raised her hand. She acknowledged their bond. Descendants linked to shadow. She decided to claim them as well. The ground exploded. Massive centipedes erupted. Essel and Gray barely escaped. As Suho clashed with Granga, he shouted for them to be careful. Essel answered confidently. She cut down an insect in one clean strike. Understanding dawned. This was the level of enemies Suho faced. She remembered why he had kept them back. To protect them. Because of the gap in strength. Her resolve hardened. Power erupted. Crimson energy surged outward. Every insect in her path was destroyed. Her hair turned pure white. Her awakening was complete. Her energy merged with Gray's. Their bond activated. A demonic presence formed. She activated her skill. Demon Strike. Crimson blades stormed across the battlefield. Everything in their path was shredded. One attack barely missed Arsha. She felt its pressure graze her face. Essel seized the opening. She dove. Her full power concentrated. She struck. Arsha blocked instantly. Their collision detonated. The battlefield shook. In the next instant, Essel released her beast possession. The violent aura surrounding her faded. As the power withdrew, Gray separated from her body. Without hesitation, he shot forward. Like a streak of shadow, he sprinted straight past Arsha. His target was clear. Pia. Pia froze as Gray rushed toward her. Her thoughts scattered. Panic surged through her chest. She raised her arms defensively. Her voice trembled as she cried out that she was not a fighter. Gray passed her without striking once. He lifted Sheikah from the frozen ground. Without slowing, he vanished with her. Pia stood frozen. Her mind went blank. The moment Essel saw Sheikah safely secured, relief washed over her face. A bright smile spread across her lips. Pride filled her eyes. She praised Gray for his perfect timing. Without wasting a second, she raised her voice. Her words echoed clearly across the battlefield. She announced that the child had been rescued. Even while locked in battle with Granga, Suho heard her. For the first time since the fight began, his expression softened. Steel and force still collided violently around him. Yet pride flickered in his eyes. Without losing rhythm, he spoke. He acknowledged their mastery of bond skills. He praised their complete control. He openly admitted his admiration. He declared that the two of them were remarkable. Arsha's expression twisted. Irritation flared across her face. She repeated his words with disdain. Bond skills. Her voice sharpened. She questioned whether such power was something only his system allowed. Frustration boiled inside her. Anger twisted her features. She admitted how deeply it enraged her. Behind her, the writhing tentacles stiffened. Their tips sharpened into lethal spears. Essel barely had time to react. The attack tore through her defenses. The sharp points pierced her abdomen. Her eyes widened. Blood spilled from her lips. Her body stiffened. A strangled gasp escaped her throat. Suho saw everything. His eyes widened. His expression hardened instantly. Before he could reach her, Arsha's form changed again. Dark wings burst from her back. A long, sinuous tail unfurled behind her. It wrapped around Essel's body. She was lifted into the air. Her form dangled helplessly. A pained groan slipped from her lips. Arsha stared down at her without emotion. Coldly, she explained that no system quest had acknowledged Essel as a companion. Therefore, she was unnecessary. Power surged through her body. Jagged, armor-like growth spread across her skin. Her presence grew heavier, more oppressive. Her eyes burned with merciless certainty. She delivered her verdict. She ordered her to die. She prepared to strike. Then, her focus shattered. Grenga's massive body suddenly flew across the battlefield. Suho's attack had hurled him through the air. He crashed violently into the frozen terrain. Arsha snapped her head toward him. Rage twisted her face. Her eyes burned crimson. She screamed in fury. Suho seized the opening. He moved instantly. His body blurred. In a single, precise motion, his blade flashed. Arsha's tail was severed midair. Essel fell. Before she could hit the ground, Suho caught her. He pulled her into his arms. In one motion, he cleared the distance. Arsha had no time to react. As she staggered backward, struggling to recover, Suho turned away from her. He did not hesitate. A faint system chime echoed. His item window opened. He knelt beside Essel. Without delay, he poured a potion over her wound. The liquid seeped into her flesh. Her body trembled. Her breathing remained shallow. She tried to speak weakly. He told her everything was all right. He urged her to rest. Gray remained close. He watched silently as the potion took effect. Suho placed a hand over his chest. Darkness gathered. The shadow dungeon opened beside him. Space tore apart. He spoke without looking back. He ordered Gray to take Essel and Sheikah inside. Gray responded immediately. Supporting Essel, he moved at once. Behind them, the ground exploded. Ice shattered upward. Granga had risen again. His massive frame surged forward. It was as if he had never fallen. Snow and debris settled. Arsha stood beside him again. Without turning, she called out. Pia responded instantly. She stepped forward with focus. She explained that she had memorized the gate's structure. Her eyes glowed soft blue. Power circulated through her gaze. Space began to warp. She warned that opening the domain would demand a heavy price, but she assured Arsha she could activate it whenever needed. Arsha regained her authority. She ordered Granga and Pia to retrieve the Frost Descendant. Behind them, space twisted violently. Reality folded inward. A glowing blue portal tore open. Lightning-like currents spiraled inside. Just as the blizzard began to swallow it, a voice cut through. Sharp, cold. Suho called out. Arsha stopped. Slowly she turned. Suho stood behind her. Shadows coiled faintly around his body. His gaze was razor-sharp. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. He questioned whether she could see the system. He asked if she was using the system created by the Shadow Monarch. Arsha smiled faintly, unhurried, confident. She denied it. She claimed her system was far superior. She declared that it had already proven its worth. She revealed that her system had predicted the Frost Descendant's appearance. Suho exhaled quietly. He lowered his gaze briefly. Relief passed through him. He said it was good to know. It meant his father had not entrusted his legacy to someone like her. He lifted his eyes. They turned cold. The tension thickened. The air grew heavy. Arsha's irritation flared. She mocked him. She pointed out that his companions had entered her domain. Suho did not react. He said he did not care. Arsha stared in disbelief. She accused him of abandoning his allies. She called him typical, someone who fought alone. His expression remained calm. He denied abandoning them. He said there was no reason to worry. Then, he vanished. The space he occupied collapsed. Distorted air and snow remained. In the next instant, he appeared in front of Arsha. Their weapons collided. A violent shockwave erupted. Suho drove forward. His voice was calm. Cutting. He told her to worry about herself. Arsha's eyes burned crimson. She met his strike head-on. Her teeth clenched. The battle surged into its next phase. Meanwhile, deep inside the shadow dungeon, Sheikah lay sprawled across fractured, shadow-drenched ground. Her body remained completely still. Then, her eyelids fluttered. A faint groan slipped from her lips. Slowly, consciousness returned. She gathered her strength and pushed herself upright. Her head spun. Confusion filled her eyes as she looked around. A trembling whisper escaped her. She tried to understand where she was. Nothing looked familiar. That was when she noticed Essel. She lay nearby, unconscious. Standing protectively in front of them was Gray. His posture was tense. His body leaned forward slightly. He stood like a shield. Ahead of him were Granga and Pia. Sheikah recognized them instantly. They were the ones who had tried to capture her earlier. Questions flooded her mind. She felt the urge to speak to them, to demand answers. But before she could move, an overwhelming pressure descended. The air suddenly grew heavy. It pressed down on her shoulders, on her chest, on her entire body. It felt as if the space itself had doubled in weight. The oppressive force crushed everything within it. Merciless, absolute. No one was spared. Then a voice followed, deep, cold, filled with authority. It warned that their lives depended on their answers. Every word carried threat and judgment. It demanded careful speech. Granga and Pia froze instantly. Their bodies reacted before their minds could. Amit stood above them. His presence dominated the dungeon. From his elevated position, he looked down on them. Power radiated from every inch of his body. His voice echoed through the shadows. He demanded to know whether they were responsible for Essel's condition. Granga and Pia slowly lifted their heads. Their expressions tightened. Fear flickered in their eyes. The moment his words ended, Amit's rage exploded. His fury could no longer be contained. He slammed his hand into the structure beside him. The impact shook the dungeon. Stones shattered instantly. Chunks of debris rained down. The dungeon trembled beneath his wrath. And the confrontation had only just begun. The episode ends here. That wraps up chapters 63 to 68 of the Solo Leveling Ragnarok series. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your support. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.